Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Wizardium, presenting to you today What If Dumbledore and McGonagall raised Harry and Hermione as their chosen successors. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1. As the night Albus Dumbledore left Harry Potter on a doorstep, he got exactly 3 streets away before he stopped walking. He stood in the middle of Privet Drive in the dark, the bundle in his arms quiet and warm, and he thought about what he was doing. Not what he had planned to do, not what Hagrid had delivered to him with such careful, weeping trust, but what he was actually doing. Leaving an infant on a doorstep in November, leaving James's son, leaving the boy who had already survived something no one had ever survived, with a letter pinned to his blanket like a note left for the milkman. He looked down at Harry. Harry looked up at him. The scar on his forehead was pink and new. Dumbledore turned around and walked back to his apparition point. He never did leave the letter. The cottage was called Larkspur, and it sat at the edge of Hogsmeade, where the village gave up pretending to be tidy and let the hills take over. It was small by any reasonable measure, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with flagstone floors that were always slightly cold, a sitting room where books had long since defeated every other form of decoration. Dumbledore had owned it for 40 years without ever quite living in it. He moved in the day after Halloween and painted the 2nd bedroom yellow, because he had no idea what color a child's room ought to be, and yellow seemed cheerful without being aggressive. Harry grew up in that yellow room with books stacked under his window and a view of the hills and the distant lights of Hogsmeade, and he was by any measure a happy child, not because his life was easy. Dumbledore was not the kind of guardian who pretended difficulties away. He told Harry about his parents when Harry was 4 and asked where they were, sitting across from him at the flagstone kitchen table with tea cooling between them, speaking plainly and without softening the edges. He told him about Voldemort, he told him about the scar, he told him about the prophecy when Harry was 7, and watched the boy sit with it for a long quiet moment before asking with perfect seriousness, "Does that mean I have to fight him?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Eventually." Harry thought about it some more. "Will you help me? Every day until then?" Harry nodded, satisfied, and went back to his book. That was the thing about Harry that Dumbledore had not entirely expected. The boy was not afraid. He was thoughtful, careful, slow to speak. He had Lily's eyes and James's cheekbones and something entirely his own behind both, but he did not fear the dark the way children were supposed to. Perhaps because he had been touched by something darker than most adults ever knew and had simply come through the other side. Perhaps because Dumbledore had never raised him on fear. Either way, Harry Potter by age 10 was one of the most composed children Dumbledore had ever met, and Dumbledore had met a considerable number. He learned magic the way other children learned language, by living inside it. Dumbledore was not a formal teacher in those early years. He was simply present, and present in ways that mattered, narrating what he was doing when he fixed things around the cottage, letting Harry watch when he practiced, answering questions with the patient precision of someone who has thought carefully about what a question actually deserves. By the time Harry was 6, he could light a candle wandlessly. By 8, he could hold a Lumos for 10 minutes without flagging. By 9, he was reading Dumbledore's old Newt textbooks not because he was told to, but because he was bored with everything else on the shelf. He also played Quidditch on a broom that was technically too large for him, and beat the local Hogsmeade children at chess with a consistency that had stopped being satisfying and started being isolating. He was not arrogant about it. He simply understood that he was different, and had learned to hold that knowledge gently, like something that might crack if he gripped it too hard. He had one friend in those years, a girl from the village named Rosalind, who didn't care about chess or magic and taught him to skip stones on the burn behind her house. She moved away when Harry was 8. He missed her the way you miss a particular slant of afternoon light, honestly, but without expecting it back. He was not lonely exactly. But he was waiting for something he didn't have a name for yet. 43 miles away, in a stone-fronted flat in Edinburgh's new town, Minerva McGonagall was raising a child she hadn't planned to, and discovering that she was remarkably good at it. Hermione Jean Granger had been born to Daniel and Emma Granger in September of 1979, and for the first 3 years of her life, she had lived an ordinary life in an ordinary house with 2 people who loved her very much, and had no idea that their daughter was extraordinary in ways that went beyond high verbal scores on her developmental assessments. Minerva had known. She'd been keeping a quiet watch on Hermione since the girl was 11 months old, and had accidentally summoned a book across the room to herself, specifically a volume on elementary chemistry that her father had left on the coffee table. The magical signature had pinged every sensor Minerva had placed on the Edinburgh district, sensors she placed in every major Scottish city once per year, part of a private project she'd been running for 2 decades, quietly noting every muggle-born magical child in Scotland, and ensuring none of them fell through the cracks the way some did. She had not intended to take Hermione in. She had intended, as she always intended, to monitor and eventually make contact when the girl was old enough for a Hogwarts letter. Then the Grangers died. A car accident on the A1 in February of 1983, A lorry that crossed the lane, nothing magical or sinister or preventable, just the particular stupid cruelty of the ordinary world. Hermione was 3, there were no living relatives. The social services file had been sitting on a caseworker's desk for 2 days when Minerva arrived, showed the appropriate documents she had prepared with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and took the girl home. She told herself it was the practical thing. She told herself the magical child needed a magical guardian. She told herself a great many things in the first 6 months that Hermione lived in the Edinburgh flat, and then she stopped telling herself anything because it had become perfectly obvious that she loved this child with a ferocity that made her chest ache, and pretending otherwise was both dishonest and exhausting. Hermione, for her part, adapted to Minerva with remarkable speed. She was a child who processed the world through questions rather than tears, which suited Minerva perfectly. She cried for her parents, of course she did, even at 3, some understanding of loss translating even without full comprehension, and Minerva held her without flinching or false comfort, said I know until the crying stopped, and then answered every question the child asked with scrupulous honesty. Where did they go? Hermione asked once, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of milk at age 4. No one knows exactly, Minerva said. There are theories. Some magical and some not. I find that uncertainty uncomfortable, but I've learned to sit with it. Hermione considered this. Do you miss people when they go? Yes. Who do you miss? Minerva paused for only a moment. A great many people. I've been alive a long time. But you're still here, Hermione said with a child's particular logic. Yes, Minerva said. I rather am. Hermione nodded, satisfied, and drank her milk. She was a voracious, almost alarming reader from the moment she decoded language, which happened earlier than it was supposed to and faster than any child Minerva had ever observed. By 5 she was reading chapter books. By 6 she was in Minerva's academic library, picking up volumes at random with the instinct of someone who had always known that books were where the real world kept its secrets. Minerva didn't restrict her. She curated, quietly removing things that were either dangerous or simply beyond the developmental reach of a 6-year-old, replacing them with volumes she thought would stretch without break. She taught Hermione to think in terms of evidence, to question sources, to ask not just what but why and how do you know and what would change your mind. Hermione's magic manifested with increasing frequency and precision as she grew. At 5 she started fires without meaning to when she was frustrated. At 6 she was moving objects intentionally and with excellent accuracy. At 7 Minerva began formal wandless lessons, sitting across from her at the kitchen table in the evenings after supper, running through exercises with the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had taught for 40 years and understood that children needed structure and honesty more than they needed encouragement. Hermione was the best student Minerva had ever taught, and Minerva was the most demanding teacher Hermione had ever encountered, and neither of them would have had it any other way. She also had, it must be said, a somewhat imperious manner that came from being raised by the most precise woman in the wizarding world, and an occasional tendency to correct people that she was aware of and could not entirely stop. The Muggle children at her primary school found her exhausting. She found them undercurious. It was an impasse that she resolved by reading through lunch, which was fine. She told Minerva she didn't particularly miss the noise. Minerva, who had done the same thing at that age, said nothing and made sure there were enough books. They met in Diagon Alley the August before Hogwarts, and neither of them was at all what the other expected. Harry had been before. He knew Diagon Alley the way you know a place you've loved since you can remember, the lean of the buildings, the smell of the apothecary, the way Gringotts loomed at the end of the street like a geographical argument for the importance of financial institutions. He moved through it easily, a step behind Dumbledore, carrying his list in one hand with the unhurried confidence of someone who does not get overwhelmed by crowds, because he has long since learned to stand at a slight remove from them. He was in Madame Malkin's being fitted for his robes when the girl came in. She was ahead of her guardian by half a step, reading something which was the first thing he noticed. Not a shopping list, she was actually reading, a small brown volume with a cracked spine, navigating around the display stands by some form of peripheral awareness that suggested long practice. She stopped 2 feet from Harry, looked up, assessed him with dark eyes that were quick and thorough, and said without preamble, "You're Harry Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "You're Hermione Granger." She blinked. "McGonagall," she corrected with the careful precision of someone to whom the distinction mattered very much. "Hermione Granger McGonagall." "Sorry," he said, and meant it. She looked at him a moment longer, reassessing. "Dumbledore's ward," she said. "His, yes, I've read about you." "Not in the public materials, those are mostly nonsense. In the historical records Minerva has at home, what actually happened that night." Harry held still while the seamstress measured his arms. "What did you think?" "I thought it was extraordinary that you survived," she said, in the tone of someone stating a mathematical fact. "I also thought the Killing Curse's failure merited more rigorous academic investigation than it has received, given that the entire subsequent 20 years of defensive magical theory rest on assumptions drawn from a single incident that no one properly documented." Harry looked at her for a moment. He had never met anyone his own age who thought like that. Dumbledore has some notes, he said. I could ask him if you could read them. Something happened in her expression. Not quite a smile, something more precise. I would like that. Minerva McGonagall came through the door then and stopped when she saw Dumbledore standing near the window. Something passed between the two adults, old colleagues, old friends, something complicated underneath, and Dumbledore's eyes crinkled the way they did when he was genuinely pleased. Minerva, Albus. She glanced at Harry and her expression did the thing that Harry had noticed adults' expressions did around him, a quick flinch of something, recognition of the scar of the parents of everything, but it was faster on McGonagall than on most and she moved past it quickly. You look well, she said to him directly without the flinching. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. She raised an eyebrow. You know who I am. Dumbledore talks about you a great deal. The eyebrow stayed up. She looked across at Dumbledore. He looked innocent. She was clearly unimpressed. Come along, Hermione, she said. Robes, then books. Books first, Hermione said. Robes, then books. The bookshop closes an hour before Madame Malkin's, so logistically, Hermione. Robes first does make sense, Hermione finished with graceful concession and moved to stand on the fitting platform next to Harry. They stood in adjacent silence while their measurements were taken. Harry was aware of her the way he was aware of things that were worth being aware of steadily, without performance. You've been practicing magic, he said, not a question. Since I was 7, earlier, Dumbledore doesn't believe in waiting. Neither does Minerva. A pause. What are you best at? Harry thought about it honestly. Transfiguration, I think, and defense. Charms, she said immediately. Also transfiguration. I've been working through the theoretical framework all summer. The principle of equivalent exchange in matter transformation is genuinely fascinating. There's a paper by Marchbanks in 1952 that she stopped. Sorry, people usually don't want the full version. I do, Harry said. She looked at him sideways. Something shifted, something that had been held carefully neutral. The Marchbanks paper argues that the energy cost of transfiguration has been systematically underestimated in standard curricula, she said, because wizards typically measure output transformation, but not what he calls the invisible residue, the magical trace that remains in both the object and the caster after the exchange. His implication, which he doesn't quite have the courage to follow through on, is that skilled transfiguration should produce progressively less residue as the caster's alignment with the spell improves, which suggests that the current Newt standard is actually measuring the wrong thing entirely. Harry thought about that. So getting better at transfiguration isn't just about power output, he said slowly. It's about how clean the exchange is. Hermione turned to look at him fully for the first time. Exactly, she said, and there was something in her voice that was surprised and pleased and trying very hard not to show either. I want to test that, Harry said. So do I, she said. I've been trying to design an experiment, but I don't have, she stopped again. I don't have anyone to run it with who would understand what we were measuring. I would. She looked at him, he looked at her. The seamstress muttered something about standing still. You're nothing like what I expected, Hermione said. What did you expect? Someone who'd been raised on the weight of being Harry Potter, she said with a frankness that would have been brutal from anyone else. Someone either arrogant or crushed by it. Dumbledore never let it be that simple, Harry said. She nodded slowly. Minerva didn't let me simplify things either. They stepped down from the fitting platform at the same time. Through the window, Dumbledore and McGonagall were talking, McGonagall's arms crossed, Dumbledore making some gesture that encompassed the whole of Diagon Alley or possibly the whole world. The familiar shorthand of people who have known each other long enough to argue in full sentences with a single look. Do you think they planned this? Hermione asked. Harry followed her gaze. Dumbledore said something. The corner of McGonagall's mouth moved very slightly. Probably, Harry said. I'd be annoyed, Hermione said, if the outcome weren't so logical. She picked up her book, tucked it under her arm, and looked at Harry with that quick, assessing look. I'm going to Flourish and Blots now if you want to come. Harry had already seen every book in Flourish and Blots on his 3 previous visits and read most of them. He went anyway. Lead the way, he said. The Hogwarts Express was, in Harry's considered opinion, an excellent institution. He liked the logic of it, everyone arriving at the same time on the same train, the playing field leveled by the simple democracy of the compartment door. He and Hermione found a compartment halfway down the train and settled in opposite each other, and when a boy with a round face and a struggling toad appeared in the door, both of them said come in at the same time. The boy's name was Neville Longbottom, and he was apologetic and kind and clearly terrified, and Harry recognized in him the particular anxiety of someone who had been told all their life that they were less than they were. He introduced himself without the weight of the name, just Harry and Hermione did the same, and watched Neville's shoulders come down 3 full inches. A red-haired boy named Ron Weasley appeared later, curious and cheerful, and stayed for the rest of the journey, eating his way through an impressive quantity of chocolate frogs and asking Harry questions with an enthusiasm that was genuinely engaging rather than sycophantic. Harry answered them honestly. Hermione corrected 3 of Ron's factual errors with the brisk tact she'd been working on. Minerva had told her that being right was only useful if the other person was actually listening, which required them to not feel attacked. She was, Harry thought, getting better at it. The castle appeared through the windows as twilight fell over the lake and the compartment went quiet. Even Hermione looked up from her book. Harry felt the familiar pull of it. Hogsmeade was down in that valley, the lights just visible, and he'd looked at Hogwarts from a distance for as long as he could remember, always knowing it was where he was going, and now finally here. He wasn't nervous. He was present, which was, he had come to understand, a rarer and more useful state. "It's bigger than the pictures," Neville said with reverence. "It always is," Harry said. The sorting was chaos organized into ceremony, which Harry found aesthetically pleasing. He sat in the Great Hall and watched the first year's file in. He knew most of them by reputation from things Dumbledore had mentioned, their families, their histories, the quiet background information of a world he'd been studying since before he could properly read, and felt the particular texture of finally being here instead of almost here. The hat was placed on his head. It was odd, the hat. Odder than he'd expected. It didn't feel like something reading him so much as something recognizing him, a long, assessing pause like an examiner who has been given an unusual problem and wants to be thorough. "Well," said the hat inside his head. "This is interesting, is it?" Harry thought. "You know it is. You've been prepared well, very well actually. I don't often feel this much deliberate shaping in a student. It's usually more accidental." A pause. "Ravenclaw would take you gladly. So would Slytherin. There's more of the strategist in you than you let on." "I know," Harry thought. "And yet you're not performing anything for me right now. That's actually the rarest quality in this hall. Most of them are performing something, bravery or studiousness or ambition. You're just sitting here. I'm curious where you'll put me." "Gryffindor," the hat said with something that might have been satisfaction. "Not because you're brave, you're beyond brave. Bravery is what people need when they're afraid, and you are not afraid. Because you're honest, relentlessly, deliberately honest. That's Gryffindor's actual heart if you get beneath the dramatics." "A beat. Don't tell the others I said that." "Gryffindor," the hat shouted. The table erupted. Harry walked to it calmly and sat down, and was immediately surrounded by people offering their hands and telling him their names, and he met each one of them properly because they deserved that. Across the hall he watched the remaining first years. He watched Draco Malfoy get sorted into Slytherin in under 10 seconds, the hat barely touched his head, and watched the way Malfoy's face rearranged itself from apprehension to satisfaction, and noted the shape of that particular relief. Hermione Granger McGonagall walked to the stool with her arms at her sides and sat down with perfect posture. The hat settled on her head and went quiet for a full 90 seconds, longer than any other student that night, long enough that a murmur ran through the hall. Harry watched her face. She was thinking. Whatever the hat was saying to her, she was engaging with it the way she engaged with everything, as a problem to be worked through with full intellectual honesty. "Gryffindor." The Gryffindor table cheered. Harry began clapping first. She found him at the table and sat across from him, and her expression was thoughtful in a way that said the conversation with the hat had been more complex than the outcome suggested. "Well," he said, "it offered me Ravenclaw," she said, "3 times. What did you say?" She reached for a glass of water. "I said I was more interested in what I do with what I learned than in learning itself." A pause. "It said that was the most Gryffindor thing anyone had said to it in 20 years. Harry smiled. It was a full one. He didn't do them halfway. "Welcome to Gryffindor." She looked at him, and for just a moment something in her expression opened, young and real and very slightly overwhelmed by all of it. This magnificent hall, this ancient castle, this beginning. And then she pulled it back, not from coldness but from habit, the armor of someone who had always needed to hold themselves together. "Thank you," she said quietly. He let it be. That was another thing Dumbledore had taught him, when to press and when to simply be present. He passed her the bread and let the feast happen around them, and when Neville knocked his goblet over 3 minutes later, Harry righted it with a wandless flick before the table was half wet, and the look on Neville's face was so grateful it was almost painful to see. "How did you?" Ron started. "Practice," Harry said easily. "You can do it too with time." "Can he?" Hermione asked, genuinely curious, not unkindly. "Probably," Harry said. "Most people can do more than they think." She turned that over, examining it. Then she nodded once in the way that meant she'd filed it under things worth investigating further. High at the staff table, Dumbledore and McGonagall sat 2 seats apart and looked down at their children, and said nothing to each other because neither of them needed to. The dungeons of Hogwarts in September had a particular smell, old stone, and the faint chemical edge of decades of potions, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with depth. Harry and Hermione's first defense against the dark arts class was taught by a man who smelled of garlic and moved in a way that was slightly wrong, not noticeably wrong, not wrong enough to point to without sounding dramatic, but wrong in the way that Harry had learned to notice things from living with a man who paid attention to everything. Professor Quirrell was nervous. People were nervous around Harry all the time, the scar, the name, the weight of it, so that by itself meant nothing. But Quirrell's particular nervousness had a direction to it. It didn't increase when Harry was speaking or being looked at. It increased when Harry was not paying attention to him. Harry paid attention to him. The class was frankly beneath them. Harry answered every question Quirrell asked, not because he needed to perform, but because the answers were right there and leaving them in his head, while Quirrell fumbled around the edges of them, was irritating in a mild, low-frequency way. He was aware that it might look arrogant. He answered anyway, clearly and without flourish, and when Hermione also answered from across the room 2 seconds after him with a precision that complemented rather than competed with his, he caught her eye and she gave him a small nod. After class, she fell into step beside him in the corridor, which had already, after 4 days, become natural. "Something's wrong with him," she said without preamble. "Yes," Harry said. "Alec isn't decorative." "No, vampire deterrent." She said it with academic crispness, which would make sense if he were afraid of vampires, but the garlic doesn't have the right smell for a ward. It hasn't been properly treated. It's just garlic. Which means he's either very bad at vampire deterrence, Harry said, or it's for something else. She glanced at him sideways. "What do you think it's for?" Harry kept his voice level. He'd been thinking about it since the first day of class. He thought about the prophecy, about Voldemort, about the particular shape of what wasn't quite right about Quirrell's nervous energy. "I think we should write to our guardians," he said. "I already did," Hermione said. "Last night." Of course she had. Harry almost smiled. "So did I." They walked the rest of the corridor in the kind of silence that isn't empty, it's full, it's thinking, it's two minds working on the same problem from different angles and not needing to narrate every step. "What did Dumbledore say?" she asked. "Watch carefully, learn what you can, don't do anything irreversible yet." He paused. "What did McGonagall say?" She was quiet for a moment. "Trust what you notice," she said, "and trust Harry." He looked at her. She kept her eyes forward, chin slightly up, the particular posture of someone who has said something more personal than they intended and is deciding not to retreat from it. "She said that," he said. "She's observed you for the past month," Hermione said. "She said your judgment is sound." A beat. I agreed for what it's worth. I try not to make decisions based on incomplete evidence, and you've given me more reason to trust you than most people give me in a year. He held that for a moment. 11 years old, both of them standing in a stone corridor in the oldest school in Britain, while a teacher with a wrong-shaped nervous system smiled at them from down the hall, and the future pressed quietly against the present like weather moving in from the west. "We'll figure it out," Harry said. "Obviously," she said. The bell rang. They went to Transfiguration, which was McGonagall's class, and it was the first time they'd had her, McGonagall the professor, in the official capacity, which was different from McGonagall at the kitchen table in Edinburgh in a way that Hermione had privately been curious about. She sat at the front without self-consciousness and watched her guardian walk into the room as a cat and shift back to a person in the same motion, and the rest of the class gasped and clutched each other, and Hermione simply noted the technical precision of it with quiet approval. McGonagall's eyes swept the room once, businesslike, and landed on Hermione for exactly the same duration as everyone else. Not a flicker more, not a flicker less. Good, Hermione thought. They were assigned to turn a match into a needle. The class bent over their matches, poking them experimentally. Harry had his needle before McGonagall finished explaining the technique, turned it silver-tipped and exact, and set it down quietly. He did not raise his hand. McGonagall came to his desk during her circuit of the room, looked at the needle and said satisfactory and moved on. Hermione's needle was 3 seconds behind his. When McGonagall reached her desk, she looked at the needle for a slightly longer moment. "Satisfactory," she said in exactly the same voice. She moved away. Hermione looked at her needle. She was smiling just at the corner. Harry leaned across the aisle. "She's not going to treat you differently, is she?" "No," Hermione said, and she sounded more relieved than she would have liked anyone to notice. "Good," he said. "It'd be weird if she did." "It would be completely inappropriate," she agreed, and the smile got a little fuller, and she turned back to her match and turned it to gold instead of silver just because she could. The week settled into the rhythm of school, classes and meals, and the particular geography of Hogwarts learning itself. The staircases that moved, the portraits that had opinions, the ghost who lived in the girls' bathroom and had clearly confused grief with residence. Harry moved through it with the ease of someone who had been waiting for exactly this, and it fit him the way a well-made coat fits, not showy, just right. He flew in the first broomstick lesson and did not show off, which was harder than showing off. He could feel the broom's pull, the instinctive ease of it. He'd flown with Dumbledore on a proper broom since he was 9, on the hills above Hogsmeade on clear Saturday mornings, and he kept himself to the middle of the pack's speed, watching the others, watching Neville clip a wall and come off his broom with a yelp, watching Draco Malfoy smirk from 2 feet off the ground. Malfoy was interesting. Harry had been watching him since the train, the way you watch something that has more going on behind it than it shows. He was performing Malfoy, performing the Slytherin air, the assured superiority, the casual cruelty toward Neville that was actually too pointed to be casual. There was fear under it. Harry could see the shape of fear in people. Dumbledore had taught him that too, not as a weapon but as an explanation. "You're not going to say anything?" Hermione asked from beside him, low, watching Malfoy mock Neville. To Malfoy, "He's being horrible." "Yes," Harry said. "He's also frightened of something which doesn't excuse it but explains it." He turned to look at her. "Neville doesn't need Malfoy stopped. He needs someone to believe in him." She absorbed that. Then she drifted toward Neville, and Harry watched her say something quiet to him, watched Neville's chin come up half an inch, and thought that Hermione's natural instinct was always to fix the problem at its source, but she was learning, they both were, that sometimes the person was more important than the problem. Madame Hooch returned. Class resumed. Harry flew when it was his turn and felt the wind knock against him like a conversation, responsive and fast, and kept himself deliberately to just better than average. Hermione couldn't fly and didn't particularly want to. She stayed at 3 feet off the ground with the focused determination of someone who has decided a thing shall be done correctly even if it is not naturally enjoyable, and when she touched back down she looked at her broom with the expression of someone closing a chapter of a book they have found adequately informative but would not be rereading. "Still rather walk?" Harry asked. "I can walk and read simultaneously," she said. "The broom makes that inadvisable." He laughed, a short real one, and she looked at him with that sideways precision that he was coming to understand her version of warmth. In October, a troll got into the castle. The Halloween feast was the context, the chaos was the mechanism, and the upshot was that Hermione was in the girls' bathroom on the second floor when the troll found its way there, which Harry knew because he went looking for her when she wasn't at the feast. A 5-minute absence became 10, which Hermione did not do, and he'd already identified the troll's direction of entry from the way the second-floor corridor door was hanging wrong. He found the troll in the bathroom doorway. It was large and it smelled terrible and it was about to lumber through the door, and Harry stepped between it and the door without hesitation, drew his wand and said, "Hermione, stand back from the sinks." "I can help," she said from inside. "I know, give me 3 seconds." He looked at the troll, did the geometry of it, ceiling height, troll's reach, its likely reaction to a direct attack, and cast a confundus with enough precision that the troll turned a full 180 and walked into the opposite wall with a thud that shook the floor. It shook its head. It turned back. It was annoyed now. Hermione came out of the bathroom behind him, wand up. "Locomotor mortis?" she asked. "Legs are too thick," he said. "Try the club." She understood immediately, aimed past the troll at the club it was dragging and said, "Wingardium Leviosa," and lifted it straight up out of the troll's grip and swung it into the ceiling where it wedged. The troll roared and reached upward. Harry hit it with a stupefy at the back of the knee. It buckled, second stupefy at the base of its neck. It went down in 2 stages, first to its knees, then flat, with the slow majesty of a building coming apart. The hallway was very quiet. Ron appeared at the end of the corridor, breathless, his wand out and his face a complicated expression of having arrived too late and trying to look like he hadn't. "I went to get you, Harry. Is she? Are you fine?" Harry said. He looked at Hermione. "Completely fine," she said with precision. She looked at the unconscious troll. "Your stupefy is extraordinary for first year. Yours will be too, given time." "How much time?" she asked, not out of insecurity, out of genuine calibration. "For you, a week if you practice properly." She filed that with a nod and turned to look at Ron. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It was kind." Ron blinked at being thanked by Hermione Granger McGonagall, who had corrected his Wingardium Leviosa pronunciation in class with a directness that had left him speechless for 4 minutes. Yeah, course." The teachers arrived, Snape, Quirrell, McGonagall, in that order, and Harry watched McGonagall look at the downed troll and then at her daughter and then at Harry, and saw the assessment happen in real time, everything accounted for, the posture and the wand grip and the state of the bathroom door and the club stuck in the ceiling. She awarded them both 10 points for handling an emergency with exceptional composure, and Harry saw, very briefly, the thing in her face that wasn't quite professional pride and wasn't quite parental relief and was entirely both. Snape was watching Harry the way he always watched Harry, with a calculation that Harry had been examining for 2 months and still hadn't fully decoded. It wasn't simple hatred, though there was hostility in it. It was something more specific. Something that had to do with James Potter and wasn't about Harry at all, but Harry kept finding himself in the way of it. He met Snape's eyes steadily. He didn't perform anything, not challenge, not deference, just presence. Something moved in Snape's expression. He looked away first. The troll was removed by the care of several professors who clearly hadn't had to do this before. Harry and Hermione and Ron walked back to the Gryffindor common room together, Ron in the middle, and by the time they reached the portrait hole they were all three talking, Ron about what he'd seen, Hermione about the aerodynamics of troll clubs, Harry listening to both and asking the questions that kept it moving, and something was settling into place among the three of them, an alignment that felt less like circumstance and more like the beginning of something. In the common room, Harry sat by the fire and wrote his weekly letter to Dumbledore, which he always did on Tuesdays, but the troll felt like a Tuesday equivalent in terms of the kind of thing Dumbledore should probably know about promptly. Hermione sat across from him, writing her own letter to McGonagall, and didn't look up when she said, "Harry, thank you for coming to find me." He didn't look up either. "You didn't need me, you were managing." "I know," she said. "That's not a pause, it mattered that you came." He looked up then. She was looking at her letter, quill still moving, the firelight doing something warm to the angles of her face. 11 years old, carrying the weight of a name that wasn't quite hers in a world that was entirely new even if she'd studied for it. "Of course I came," he said simply. She didn't say anything. But her handwriting, he noticed, got a little more relaxed after that, the words slightly looser, the pen pressure slightly less precise. Small things, he noticed them. He went back to his letter. Outside, Hogwarts settled into its nighttime sounds, the castle breathing, the lake moving, the grounds dark under clear November sky. Down the corridor in the room that smelled of garlic and something older than garlic, Quirrell stood at his window and felt, for the first time since September, genuinely afraid, not of the Dark Lord he carried, of the two children who had just put down a mountain troll with the detached efficiency of people who were not doing it for the first time. He'd noticed them in class. Of course he had. It was impossible not to. He pressed his fingers to his turban and felt the cold answer. "Be patient," said the voice. "They are children." Quirrell stared at the dark grounds and said nothing because he wasn't sure that was true. The term moved toward December and the castle changed as it went, the grounds hardening with early frost, the torches burning lower, the first years navigating Hogwarts with the increasing confidence of people who have learned which staircases not to trust. Harry and Hermione expanded, as the weeks went on, into the particular ease of two people who have found each other's pace and stopped performing anything. They studied together in the library on evenings when they weren't training, and they trained, privately, in an empty classroom on the third floor that Harry had found in October, and which suited them both. Not defense practice only, or charms only, but the broader investigation of magic that neither of them could quite get enough of in classes. The Marchbanks paper on transfiguration residue, which they were quietly running experiments on with the rigor of people who don't care what the conclusion is as long as it's honest. A wandless magic progression that Harry had mapped out based on his pre-Hogwarts practice, and that Hermione was adding to, restructuring, improving, turning from instinct into something systematic. They were getting better, faster than they were supposed to. Fast enough that Harry had occasionally to remind himself to not use the full range of what he knew in classes, not because he was hiding, but because the point of a class was to learn from it, and blowing past every lesson in the first week didn't give him anything useful. Hermione had no such restraint in transfiguration. McGonagall's class was the one place she let herself move at full speed, and McGonagall's class was, consequently, the one place where Hermione always looked most purely herself, focused, fast, precise, and quietly thrilled in a way she allowed herself nowhere else. Harry watched her from across the room one Tuesday afternoon, turning a teapot into a tortoise with a fluency that made the third years at the adjacent desk look mortified, and thought that if you wanted to know who Hermione Granger McGonagall actually was, this was the answer. Someone in the full expression of their ability, without apology, without performance, just the work and the joy in it and the room adjusting itself around her. She looked up and caught him watching. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Your tortoise is better than mine." She looked at his tortoise, which was excellent. "Marginally," she said. "More than marginally." "Fine, yes." She looked pleased. She turned away and turned the tortoise back into a teapot and then into a tortoise again, just refining it the way she always refined things. McGonagall came by and looked at the tortoise and looked at Harry's. She said nothing. But she took an extra second at each desk, a fraction of a beat longer than her average pause, and moved on. That evening Harry wrote to Dumbledore about Quirrell again. He was more certain now. Something about the man was getting worse, more erratic, the wrongness sharpening into something that Harry could almost taste at the back of his mind, like the charge before a storm. He didn't know yet what was underneath the turban, but he was getting closer. The last evening before Christmas break, after almost everyone had gone down to the feast, Harry sat alone in the empty classroom on the third floor and ran through a sequence of wandless spells in the quiet, smooth, clean, barely any visible exertion, the way he liked it when no one was watching. The practice that didn't need an audience. The thing he did because the magic asked to be used, the way a voice asks to sing. Hermione appeared in the doorway at 7:30 with 2 mugs of tea from the kitchen and the Marchbanks paper under her arm. She had not been invited. She had not needed an invitation. She sat cross-legged on the floor across from him, set the tea between them, and opened the paper. "I've been thinking about the residue," she said. "Tell me," he said, and reached for his tea, and the room was warm against the December cold outside, and the castle held them both in its ancient patient quiet while they worked. These two children who had been raised to inherit something vast and complicated and necessary, both of them exactly where they needed to be. Through the high window, Hogsmeade glittered in the valley below. Dumbledore was probably down there. McGonagall too, maybe, in the castle somewhere, marking papers. Their guardians, their teachers, their extraordinary and flawed and deeply intentional parents by choice. Harry didn't think about any of that. He thought about the problem at hand and drank his tea and listened to Hermione explain the residue theory with the full-throttle intellectual delight that was her most unguarded self, and felt for the first time in his life not like he was waiting for something. He felt like it had already begun. Chapter 2. The board moves. The third-floor corridor on the right-hand side was forbidden. Dumbledore had announced it at the start of term feast, with the pleasant, matter-of-fact delivery of someone mentioning that the pudding was particularly good this year, and the effect on the student body had been predictable. 3/4 of Hogwarts now thought about the third-floor corridor with the particular intensity reserved for things you are not supposed to think about. The remaining quarter included the Weasley twins, who had already been up there and come back unimpressed, and Harry, who had noted the announcement with the quiet attention he gave to everything Dumbledore said, And Hermione, who had gone to the library the following morning and read everything she could find about what Hogwarts had historically used its third floor for. She'd found 3 relevant historical references and 1 architectural diagram that suggested the right-hand corridor connected to a descending passage that predated the castle's current foundation by at least 200 years. She told Harry over breakfast. He passed her the marmalade and said, "Fluffy." She blinked. "I'm sorry, there's something alive up there. I could hear it through the door when I walked past on Wednesday." Big multiple, he paused, choosing precision. Multiple breathing rhythms, synchronized. She absorbed this. "You went past the door. I didn't go through it. That is a remarkably fine distinction. Dumbledore told me to watch carefully," he said. "Watching requires proximity." Hermione looked at him over her pumpkin juice. She was doing the thing where she calculated whether to be annoyed with him and concluded it wasn't worth the energy. "What's the strategic logic?" she asked instead. "He's keeping something there." Has been since before term started. Hagrid mentioned moving something from Gringotts in August. "And you were there when Dumbledore let me read the Prophet report about the Gringotts break-in." He spread marmalade with the same care he brought to everything, unhurried. "Someone tried to steal something from Vault 713, found it empty. Whatever was in it is now under a 3-headed dog on the 3rd floor." She was quiet for a moment, putting it together. "The Philosopher's Stone," she said. He looked at her. "Nicola's Flamel," she said. "I found a reference in a history of alchemy. He's the only known maker of the stone, and Dumbledore is his closest living associate. If the stone needed hiding and Gringotts was compromised," she stopped. "Who tried to take it from Gringotts? That," Harry said, "is the more important question." Across the Great Hall, Quirrell ate his breakfast with his hood up against the November cold and didn't look at either of them, which was, Harry had learned, how Quirrell avoided looking at things he was thinking about very hard. Snape was the most interesting problem of Harry's first year at Hogwarts, and Harry had given him a great deal of thought. He was not what Harry had expected. Dumbledore had told him about Severus Snape, former Death Eater, current spy, a man whose loyalty existed but whose affection needed to be neither assumed nor solicited. He'd said it with the careful precision of someone presenting information rather than advocacy. Harry had arrived prepared for complexity. What he hadn't been prepared for was the quality of the man's intelligence. Snape's potions class was, objectively, the best academic experience of Harry's first year. Not because Snape was kind, he was not, but because Snape treated the subject with an exacting seriousness that Harry found, almost against his will, deeply engaging. There was nothing performed about it. Snape moved through the principles of potion-making the way a craftsman moves through a workshop, every gesture precise, every correction delivered with the brisk contempt of someone who believes the material deserves better than sloppiness. He disliked Harry. He showed it without subtlety, taking points for things that weren't quite errors, asking questions designed to expose gaps, walking past Harry's cauldron with a particular expression that sat between assessment and old grievance. Harry didn't take it personally. He took it seriously, which was different. He made sure his potions were flawless, not showy, flawless in the way that left nothing for Snape to legitimately dock. Snape noticed. Harry could see it in the fractional pause over his cauldron each lesson, the way the criticism shifted from factual error to subjective judgment, the way a man runs out of ammunition and has to reach further back. "You're baiting him," Hermione said one Thursday, crushing lacewing flies with more force than strictly necessary. "I'm not doing anything," Harry said. "You're doing everything correctly and then looking at him. I look at all the teachers. You look at Snape differently." She glanced up. "You're waiting for something." He turned his beetle eyes clockwise, exact count, exact time. "He's watching Quirrell," he said quietly under the sound of the class. "Every lesson. He comes in, establishes himself, and then puts Quirrell in his peripheral line of sight for the rest of the class. It's not curiosity, it's surveillance." Hermione's pestle slowed. "He suspects him too. He knows something. Whether it's the same thing we suspect or something adjacent." Harry added his beetle eyes to the lacewing mixture and watched the color shift precisely where it should. "I think Snape is trying to protect the stone. From Quirrell." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment, both of them working, the potions classroom dim and smelling of copper and sulfur. "Then Snape is on our side," she said finally. "He's on Dumbledore's side," Harry said, "which is largely the same thing but not identical." The difference, Harry considered. "Dumbledore told me once that Severus Snape would die for the right cause, but he'd be unpleasant about it. A beat. I think he loves Hogwarts, and I think someone threatening it makes him specific." "Is that respect?" she asked. "It's acknowledgement," he said, "which is what I actually have for most people." She turned back to her potion. "You respect very few people," she said, not critically, factually. "Do you disagree with my assessments?" A pause. "No," she admitted, "but I find it notable that a boy who's been raised by possibly the most respected wizard alive is not particularly deferential." "Dumbledore doesn't want my deference," Harry said. "He wants my judgment." He stirred twice. "What does McGonagall want from you?" She didn't answer immediately. He waited. "Honesty," she said finally, "and precision." A beat. "She told me once that people who need you to perform certainty when you're uncertain are people who need you to protect their comfort. She said my job was never to protect anyone's comfort, including hers." Harry looked at her. She was looking at her cauldron. "I like her," he said. "She'd be insufferable if she knew you said that," Hermione said, but her voice was warm. Snape appeared at their station. He looked at their cauldrons. Both of them correct, both of them precise, the colors a clean separation that suggested two students who had actually read the chapter rather than the summary. He stood there for a moment in the particular silence of a man searching for something he can't quite find. Adequate, he said, and moved on. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at Hermione. High praise, he said very quietly. She pressed her lips together to prevent a smile. Don't push it, she whispered. December brought the Mirror of Erist. Harry found it on a Thursday night in January. Actually, December had brought exams and the holiday break, during which Hermione had gone to Edinburgh with McGonagall and Harry had remained at Hogwarts working, thinking and playing chess against himself in the empty common room in the long evenings. He had written to Hermione every 3 days. She had written back every 2, which he found touching and didn't mention. The mirror was in an unused classroom on the 5th floor, and Harry found it the way he found most things, by being somewhere he was paying attention. He'd been following a peculiar magical signature, something old, something with deep enchantment layers that had been pulling at the edge of his awareness for a week. He stood in front of it at 11:30 at night, his invisibility cloak, a gift from Dumbledore, who had explained matter-of-factly that it had belonged to Harry's father, bundled in his hands, and looked at what it showed him. He'd expected his parents. He'd been told the standard interpretation of the mirror by Dumbledore, who had mentioned it once in passing. It shows the viewer their deepest desire. He'd thought clinically that he knew what that would be. What he saw was himself, standing in a place that wasn't defined, a space, a clearing, an indeterminate sense of after, and he was not alone. Hermione was there, McGonagall, Dumbledore, Neville and Ron, and people he couldn't quite name but could feel the shape of, the texture of a world that had come through something and arrived at something else. No war, no prophecy, just after. He stood with his reflection for a long time, not distressed by it, not drawn dangerously into it, but honest about what it meant. He was lonely in a way he hadn't named yet, not miserable, not that, but the particular ache of someone who cares deeply about people and hasn't yet let himself be known by enough of them. He pulled the cloak back on and went to bed. He told Dumbledore in his next letter because he told Dumbledore everything. Dumbledore wrote back, "The mirror shows desire, not destiny. Do not confuse the two, but do not dismiss what it tells you about yourself either. The capacity for that kind of longing is not weakness, Harry. It is the engine of everything you'll do that matters." Harry read it twice and put it in the tin under his bed where he kept Dumbledore's letters and thought about it for 3 days, and by the time Hermione came back from Edinburgh he had resolved something in himself that he didn't have words for, a turning, a small shift like a compass settling on true north. He met her at the entrance to the common room when she arrived back, which surprised her. "You waited up," she said. "It's 10 o'clock, he said. "I'm always up at 10. She looked at him in that way she had, reading the text and the subtext simultaneously. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," he said, and meant it more cleanly than he usually did. "How was Edinburgh?" She sat down across from him by the fire, unwinding her scarf with the brisk precision of someone who has spent January in Scotland and knows not to make a production of the cold. "Minerva made me read the entire Newt Transfiguration syllabus over break," she said, and it's less rigorous than it should be in the 3rd section," she said, with the comfortable certainty of someone whose opinion on the Newt curriculum has been solicited and delivered. "The treatment of human transfiguration is almost entirely theoretical with no practical framework," which she stopped. "Sorry, you probably don't want the full debrief." "I always want the full debrief," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled her notes from her bag and put them on the table between them and started from the beginning, and the fire went down to embers around them while she talked, and he asked questions, and outside the January wind moved the lake into dark waves, and the castle settled around 2 11-year-olds who were working out, in their particular unhurried way, how to occupy the same space. February was when things started moving faster. Harry noticed Quirrell's deterioration in increments, a shakiness in the right hand, a particular thinning of the face, the smell of something stale and wrong that had intensified since the winter. He tracked it the way you track weather, noting changes, building a picture. By mid-February he was certain. By the 1st of March he'd made his decision. He went to Dumbledore's office. The gargle stepped aside without the password, which meant Dumbledore was expecting him, which meant Dumbledore had already reached the same conclusion, which was, in Harry's view, appropriate. The office was warm and full of the softly whirring silver instruments and the portraits of former headmasters dozing in their frames, and Dumbledore was behind his desk with Fawkes on the perch beside him, and he looked at Harry over his half-moon glasses with the expression he wore when he was already 4 steps ahead and waiting to see if Harry would catch up. "Quirrell," Harry said. Dumbledore set down his quill. "Sit down, Harry, you know." "I know more than I have told you," Dumbledore said, "which I will acknowledge is a deliberate choice I have made and one I'm prepared to explain." Harry sat. He was not angry, he was listening, which was where he usually started. "Voldemort is possessing him," Dumbledore said with the directness Harry had always appreciated. "It has been progressing since early autumn. Quirrell sought him out, not the other way around. He believed he could control the arrangement." A pause. "He was wrong. The strongest will always prevail in such an arrangement. And while Quirinus Quirrell is not without intelligence, he is very much without the particular qualities one would need to survive proximity to Tom Riddle. He's after the stone, Harry said. Yes, he has not yet been able to pass the protections. He'll try soon, he's getting less stable. Harry looked at Fawkes, who looked back with the ancient calm of a creature that has burned and returned enough times to find urgency somewhat relative. You should move the stone. I intend to. A pause. I was in fact leaving for the ministry this evening to make the necessary arrangements. I suspect Dumbledore's eyes were steady and careful and something else underneath, that the attempt will come tonight while I am away. Harry held that for 3 seconds. You're telling me this before you leave? I'm telling you this before I leave. That's not a coincidence. It rarely is with me, Dumbledore said, and there was something in it that wasn't apology exactly. It was closer to honesty, the particular honesty of a man who has been strategic for so long it has become architecture. I will not ask anything of you, Harry. I want to be clear about that. What happens tonight is something I have prepared for, and the protections are substantial, and Quirrell's path through them will not be easy. But you're telling me, Harry said. I'm telling you. And Hermione. Dumbledore paused, a fractional beat, just enough to acknowledge that he had already thought about this and had decided. Minerva will be here tonight, he said. She will be another pause. She will be occupied elsewhere if certain events require it. She does not know I have orchestrated this. You may reach your own conclusions about whether to tell her. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He was 11 years old and sitting across from the most powerful wizard alive and parsing the layers of a plan that had more flaws than it showed from the outside. It was, he thought, a complicated thing to love someone who played this much chess. It required understanding that the chess was never against you, just around you, for reasons he had always in the end been able to trust. You want us to go, Harry said, because you need to know what's down there. What Voldemort actually does when he reaches the end. I need to know who he is at the end of it, Dumbledore said. I know what the stone does, Harry. What I do not fully know is what Tom Riddle has become, how far his dissolution has gone, what resources he will bring to a direct confrontation. He folded his hands on the desk. I would not send you in blind. You are prepared. Both of you are more prepared than anyone in this building knows except me and Minerva. You'll be there, Harry said, not a question. I will be there, Dumbledore said, before anything irreversible occurs. Harry stood. I'll find Hermione. Harry. Dumbledore's voice stopped him at the door. Harry turned. The old man looked at him across the warmly lit room, across the whirring instruments and the dozing portraits and all the accumulated weight of a life spent carrying things, and his eyes were bright and absolutely sincere. Whatever you find down there, you are not fighting for my sake. You are not fighting for the prophecy's sake. If you understand nothing else, understand that. Harry looked at him. I know, he said. I never was. He closed the door quietly behind him. Hermione was in the library when he found her, which was where she usually was at 7 in the evening on a Tuesday. She had 4 books open on the table in front of her in a configuration that suggested she was cross-referencing, and she looked up when he appeared and read his face in the first second. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he said. She closed all 4 books with efficient stacked movements. Tell me everything. He did, standing across the table from her fast and without editorializing. She listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly the time it took to process and order what she'd heard. He's going to let us go in first, she said. Dumbledore. Yes, to learn something. Her voice was even. Not angry, processing. What do you think he needs to learn that we can find out and he can't? How Voldemort responds to us specifically, Harry said. We're the unknowns in this. Dumbledore, he understands. Quirrell, he understands. He doesn't know what we are yet. She looked at him steadily. Are you all right with that? The question landed cleanly because she meant it cleanly, not as challenge or accusation. Just, are you actually all right with being a variable in someone else's equation tonight? Yes, he said, and it was honest. Dumbledore doesn't do things carelessly. If he needs this, he needs it. He paused. Are you? She picked up her wand from the table, turned it once in her fingers with the particular focus of someone running through their mental checklist. I want to know what's down there, she said. I've wanted to know since October. The fact that tonight makes that strategic is fine by me. McGonagall, he said, will be occupied, Hermione said, which means she'll figure out what occupied her was constructed, and she'll be a pause. She'll be furious after. Something crossed her face, not worry but a specific awareness, the kind that came from knowing someone very well. With Dumbledore, not with me. Are you certain? She picked up her bag. She raised me to follow evidence and act on it, she said. If I have evidence that something needs doing and I have the capability to do it, she will not be angry that I did it. She will be angry that she wasn't there. She moved toward the library door. Come on, I want to get there before Quirrell does. The third-floor corridor at 8:30 in the evening was empty of everyone except Harry and Hermione, who stood in front of the door with their wands out, and Harry opened it with a simple Alohomora, and they both looked at the 3-headed dog. It was asleep, its 3 heads lolled at angles, breathing in the deep, rhythmic pattern of enchanted sleep, and on the floor between its paws was a trapdoor open, the harp that Quirrell had charmed still playing a thin, reedy lullaby to an audience that was no longer listening. He's already through, Hermione said. Not long ago, Harry said. He could smell the traces of whatever spell Quirrell had used on the dog, the chemical edge of it still in the air. 5 minutes, maybe 10. They dropped through the trapdoor without discussion. The devil's snare was Sprout's contribution, And it was excellent, a mass of writhing tendrils that seized them both the moment they landed, strong as rope and faster than rope, the kind of thing that could make a panicking person panic harder until they couldn't breathe. Hermione said Lumos Maxima and Harry said Incendio controlled, and 2 seconds of light and directed fire later they were through it and dropping onto solid ground, both of them breathing normally. Sprouts, Hermione said. Good instinct for the containment, Harry said approvingly. If we didn't know the countermeasure, we'd have had to reason it out under pressure. She looked at the corridor ahead, which is probably what most people would have to do. The question is whether Quirrell knew in advance or reasoned it out. He's been at this school for years, he knew. Harry moved forward. Come on. The winged keys were in a high-vaulted room full of swooping, clattering wings and a single locked door. The broomsticks were there too, 4 of them, and Hermione looked at the broomsticks and then at Harry with the expression of someone preparing to be competent at something they'd rather not do. I'll get the key, he said. He was on the broom and through the cloud of keys in 45 seconds. Not because he was showing off, he wasn't, there was no audience worth performing for, but because he had flown since he was 9 and his body and the broom had a conversation that bypassed conscious thought, and the old, battered key with the bent wing was visible to him the moment he reached altitude. He had it in his hand, the door unlocked, and was back on the ground before Hermione had finished scanning the cloud to map the key's pattern. Show off, she said. Efficiency, he said. She walked through the door ahead of him, which he didn't point out, and they moved into the chessboard room. The chess set was McGonagall's, and it was enormous, the pieces white marble and black obsidian, each one twice the height of either of them, the board stretching the full width of the chamber. On the far side, the black pieces were in disorder. Quirrell had played through, and recently, and the board was mid-game, the pieces confused, several of them damaged from the last round of play. Hermione walked to the edge of the board and assessed it for 30 seconds. Harry stood beside her and did the same. He played white, she said, aggressively, got through but took losses. Harry studied the configuration. We play black. I see it, she said. 14 moves. 12, he said. She looked at the board again. He waited. 12, she said. You're right, knight to e4 opens it. After you, he said. She played black. It took 11 moves, actually. She found a compression in the middle game that Harry hadn't seen, and he told her so, and she said the queen's position after Quirrell's 7th move creates a diagonal, and they talked through it while they played, standing at the edge of the board giving coordinates, the giant pieces moving with the grinding thunder of stone on stone. No one was injured. No pieces attacked them. The configuration they'd inherited from Quirrell's game meant the black side already had positional dominance. They were cleaning up someone else's work, which Hermione found aesthetically unsatisfying but Harry thought was probably fine. Checkmate, she said on the 11th move with quiet satisfaction. The door opened. Snape's challenge was a logic puzzle, 7 bottles, a riddle, a fire barrier forward and a nettlewine barrier back. Hermione read the riddle once. 1, she said, touching the 3rd bottle from the left. You're certain, Harry said. It's the only bottle that satisfies all 3 constraints simultaneously, she said. The poison clues eliminate 5, the nettlewine clue is the misdirect and the sizing. She stopped. Yes, I'm certain. Then we go forward, Harry said. Both of us. There's only enough for one person, she said. It's a thimble-sized portion. He looked at her. No, there isn't. She looked at the bottle. She picked it up. The portion inside was indeed small, perhaps enough for one average adult. She turned it in her hands, reading something in the glass he hadn't seen. Refilling charm, she said slowly. Built into the bottle, it refills once consumed. A beat. Why would Snape build that in? Because he expected 2 people to come through, Harry said, or because he wanted there to be a way back. He watched her thinking. Either way, she handed him the bottle. He drank first. She'd started to reach for it, but he moved first smoothly, and she understood without argument that it wasn't about chivalry but logistics. He felt the coolness of it going down and warmth and no pain, and after a moment he was simply standing on the other side of the fire looking through at her. He held up the bottle. It was full again. She drank and stepped through, and they stood together in the final chamber. Quirrell was there. He stood with his back to them, facing the mirror of Erist, and his hands were working in the frustrated, repetitive way of someone trying a combination that isn't coming. He was muttering. The turban was unwound from his head, and what was on the back of Quirrell's skull was not hair. The face turned. It had been Tom Riddle once, not so long ago in the eternal timeline of dark magic, barely 50 years. But the deterioration of a soul split and split again, and shelled out of everything human had left something that was barely organized enough to wear a face, pale, red-eyed, flat-nosed, with an intelligence that was still ferociously present even in ruin. Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry looked back. The room was very quiet. The boy who lived, said the face on the back of Quirrell's head, and the voice was still recognizable, educated, precise, with the crisp consonants of someone who had once used language as a scalpel. And his little companion, how extraordinary that you're here. It's not extraordinary, Harry said. It was obvious that tonight was when you'd try. A pause, something moved in the red eyes, not surprise, recalculation. Obvious. You've been deteriorating since October. The window narrows the longer you wait. Quirrell's attachment to his body grows more tenuous as the possession deepens, which creates risk of exposure. You needed to move. Harry glanced at Quirrell's face, which was wearing the particular blankness of a man who had given up piloting himself. I imagine he resisted longer than you expected. The boy has been educated, said Voldemort, and there was something in it, not admiration, but the recognition of a quality by someone who understands it precisely. The intelligence in those red eyes was genuinely active, turning, reading him. Dumbledore's doing. Partly, Harry said, partly mine. Another pause. You are not afraid of me. No, you should be. Perhaps, Harry said, but I've known about you my entire life. You lose the advantage of the unknown after a while. Voldemort made a sound that might have been a laugh in a thing that still did laughter. And the girl, my name is Hermione Granger McGonagall, Hermione said from half a step to Harry's left, her voice precise and perfectly steady, and I'd rather you not speak about me in the third person while I'm standing directly in front of you. It's rude. Something almost human flickered in the ruined face. McGonagall's girl, he said. Yes, she said. The lionesses whelp more lions, Voldemort said. How very don't, Harry said, and the word had weight in it, not anger, not a shout, just wait. The flat certainty of someone who is finished with preamble. The red eyes came back to him, and there was something there, something Harry hadn't anticipated, and that registered as significant discomfort, not fear. Voldemort didn't feel fear the way he'd burned out everything that allowed it. But there was something that was fear's structural cousin, the recognition that this was not a known configuration. Give me the stone, Voldemort said. You don't have a body, Harry said, and you're not getting one tonight, so let's skip the negotiation. I could kill you, Voldemort said. Quirrell is capable of it. You could try, Harry said, and I'd be interested to see what happens, given what occurred last time someone tried to kill me. But I suspect that's not actually what you want to do, not yet, not until you understand what I am. He paused. That's why you haven't moved. The red eyes stayed on him, calculating, dissecting. Harry could feel it, the pressure of an intelligence that had spent decades reading people, peeling them apart, finding the soft places. It found nothing soft. Not because Harry was performing hardness, but because Dumbledore had raised him to know himself, and knowing yourself thoroughly is the best armor against people who hunt for gaps. You're more interesting than I expected, Voldemort said finally, and it sounded like something he hadn't entirely decided to say, a concession that slipped through. I know, Harry said. Hermione moved. She moved the way she did everything, with complete forethought, stepping left, angling between Quirrell and the mirror, and she said a spell Harry hadn't heard before in a voice that was sharp and exact and clear. It was something she'd constructed from the Marchbanks paper from 3 weeks of private experiments, something that measured and disrupted the residue of a specific kind of magical presence, and what happened was this: Quirrell seized, not from pain. From interruption, the way a machine interrupts when a component is pulled. The possession, the link between Quirrell and Voldemort buckled. Quirrell screamed. Voldemort screamed through Quirrell's mouth, a sound like something tearing, and Harry stepped forward and grabbed Quirrell's wrist and held it. And the burning started immediately, the old magic, his mother's magic, the thing that had always lived in his skin, and Quirrell burned from the contact the way Hermione's theory had predicted it would burn, specific to the possessor, concentrated where Voldemort's will was strongest. Quirrell went to his knees. The mirror behind them all showed nothing. The stone was already somewhere else. Harry had known this since he walked into the room. Dumbledore had moved it before he left, which was the actual plan, the whole thing staged not to protect the stone but to show Voldemort what waited for him if he returned. Who waited for him? You've already lost tonight, Harry said, looking down at Quirrell, whose hands were charring at the skin where Harry held them. He released the grip. He wasn't trying to kill Quirrell. Quirrell was a victim. The stone isn't here. It hasn't been here since this morning. You came all this way for a confrontation that was prepared for you. The red eyes were blazing. You tell him, Harry said, meaning Voldemort, meaning the message he needed to carry back to whatever form of continued existence awaited him when he fled this ruined body. Tell him what you saw here, 2 children, 11 years old. Tell him we weren't afraid, and tell him we weren't alone, and tell him that if he comes back wearing a better body, we'll be 12 years older than we are right now and ready for it. Voldemort looked at him through Quirrell's dying eyes and said nothing. Then the spirit, the fragment, the Horcrux preserved sliver wrenched free of Quirrell and fled through the chamber wall like smoke. Quirrell collapsed. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Hermione was beside Harry in 2 steps, kneeling by Quirrell, her fingers at his neck. He's alive, she said. Barely. She looked up. We need Dumbledore. He's coming, Harry said. And he was. Harry could feel it, the approach of something enormous and settled and warm, the magical signature that had been the backdrop of his entire childhood descending the passages toward them, unhurried but moving with purpose. Dumbledore came through the door and took in the room in a single look, Quirrell unconscious on the floor, Hermione kneeling beside him, Harry standing in the middle of the chamber with the mirror behind him and nothing in his hands and nothing in his face except the straightforward calm of someone who has done what needed doing and feels neither proud nor diminished by it. He looked at Harry for a long moment. He's gone, Harry said, for now. I know, Dumbledore said. I felt it. He came to Quirrell, crouched beside him with the focused attention of someone who understands the difference between saving and losing. Then he looked at Hermione. What spell was that? I didn't recognize it. I developed it, she said. From Marchbank's work on magical residue, it disrupts the anchor points of a possessing presence. She hesitated. It's not stable yet as a spell. I only got one cast before the connection fractured. If Quirrell had been stronger, I'm not certain it would have held. Nevertheless, Dumbledore said, and his voice had something in it that was, very precisely, pride. It was remarkable, Miss Granger McGonagall, genuinely remarkable. He stood. How did you know the stone wasn't there? We didn't, Harry said. I inferred it might not be from the fact that you told me you were leaving and also told me Quirrell would likely make his attempt tonight. That's an unusual amount of information to share before departing if the object of concern was still in danger. A pause. Was I right? You were right, Dumbledore said. I moved it this morning. He looked at the mirror. I owe you both a more complete account of what I knew and when. I'll provide it. Not now. He glanced at Quirrell. Now I have a more immediate concern, but soon. I'll hold you to that, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. He looked for a moment like a man who is seeing something he hoped for and has only now confirmed, like a man who wagered a great deal on the quality of what he'd built and has just seen the returns. I expect nothing less, he said. Hermione stood up. She had a small burn on her right wrist where a Quirrell-conjured hex had clipped her, nothing serious, already fading, and she looked at it with detached assessment and said, We should get that seen to. Hospital wing, Harry said, after we've briefed Dumbledore properly. He was there, Harry said. He didn't see everything, she said, with the particular firmness of someone who believes debriefs have value even when the audience was a participant. Dumbledore made a sound that might have been a laugh if headmasters laughed in tunnels where Dark Lords had just been routed by a pair of first-years. He converted it smoothly into a cough. Perhaps, he said mildly, we could do both simultaneously on the way to the hospital wing. That's acceptable, Hermione said, and led the way back to the passage because she always led with logistics. McGonagall was waiting in the hospital wing. She was standing at the window when they came in, her hands clasped behind her back in the posture of someone who has been standing very still for a controlled period of time in order to remain that controlled. She turned when they entered, looked at Hermione first, did the assessment in 2 seconds, burn on the wrist minor already treated, posture upright not shaken, and then looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was several things at once and none of them soft. Albus, she said. Minerva, he said, we will be discussing your methodology, she said with the precision of someone filing a formal notice. I would expect nothing less, he said with the exact same words Harry had used, and if there was something that passed between the old friends in that moment, acknowledgement, affection, the complicated love of people who have disagreed for decades and still kept choosing each other, neither of them named it. McGonagall looked at Hermione. She crossed the room and sat beside the bed where Madame Pomfrey was waving things at Hermione's wrist, and she said nothing for a moment, just sat. I'm fine, Hermione said. I can see that, McGonagall said. I made good decisions. I know. I want you to know that I didn't take unnecessary risks. I evaluated the Hermione. McGonagall's voice was not loud, it was quiet in a way that stopped the words. I know all of that. I know it because I taught you, and I know it because I know you. She looked at her hands, folded in her lap, the knuckle-white loosening as she made herself let it go. I'm not angry with you, a beat. You're angry with Dumbledore, Hermione said, profoundly. Hermione was quiet then. He needed us to go, and we were capable. Both things are true. Both things are true, McGonagall agreed, and I can simultaneously believe both and wish I had been there. Hermione looked at her. I know, she said quietly, I know you do. They sat together in the hospital wing while Madame Pomfrey fussed, and Harry sat 2 beds over and pretended not to have heard any of it, and Dumbledore stood near the door with Fawkes on his shoulder and thought about what he'd built and what it had cost and whether the accounts balanced. They didn't quite, they never did in Dumbledore's experience. But the deficit was smaller than he'd feared, and the return was greater than he'd dared to calculate, and that was close enough to write for a man who had long since stopped expecting perfection from himself. Harry caught his eye across the room. Dumbledore gave him a small nod. It meant, well done. It meant, I know, it meant, we have things to discuss, you and I, and we will discuss them fully. It meant underneath all of that, in the frequency of a relationship built over 11 years of morning tea and evening chess, and the patient, particular love of a guardian who chose rather than inherited, I'm glad you're all right. Harry nodded back, same frequency, same depth. He looked at the window. First year almost done. Voldemort routed, not defeated. The stone safe. Quirrell gone, Pomfrey had confirmed it. The absence of Voldemort's presence had left him with a failing body and nothing to sustain it, and he'd slipped away in the early hours. Harry felt the weight of that, the particular grief of someone who understands the difference between an enemy and a victim and held it where it belonged. Harry, Hermione said from 2 beds over. Yes, next year, she said with the flat certainty of someone making a contingency plan, we should be faster. He looked at her across the ward. She was sitting up straight despite everything, her wrist bandaged, her expression already forward-facing, already cataloguing what needed improving, already thinking about what came next. He felt, in a way he didn't try to quantify, profoundly grateful, not for what she'd done tonight, though that had been extraordinary, but for the fact of her, the constant, demanding, brilliant fact of her, already in motion, already building toward whatever was next. We will be, he said. Outside, the June sky was lightening toward dawn, the grounds below going from black to grey to the first pale gold, the lake turning over in the morning wind. Hogwarts held them all in its ancient stones and said nothing. The way old things that have held a great many beginnings know that this one, like all the others, was still only the start. Chapter 3, The Diary. The summer between first and second year was the longest Harry could remember, and also the most productive, which he suspected was not a coincidence. Dumbledore had kept his promise. 3 days after the events in the third-floor dungeon, they sat in his office, Harry, Hermione, and both their guardians, and Dumbledore told them everything he knew about Voldemort. Not the sanitized version, not the carefully shaped narrative. Everything. The Horcruxes which he suspected but had not confirmed. The night in Godric's Hollow, the full account. The prophecy, read aloud in Dumbledore's precise voice without editorial comment, let to sit in the room and be what it was. McGonagall, beside Hermione, said nothing through any of it. Her face did the things it did when she was processing something she didn't like, a slight tightening around the eyes, a controlled stillness, but she held her peace until Dumbledore finished, and then she said, "How many Horcruxes do you believe there are?" 6 at minimum, Dumbledore said. "Possibly 7. Then the stone and Quirrell were never the real problem," she said. "No," Dumbledore said, "they were a symptom." Hermione was writing. She'd had her notebook out since the first mention of the word Horcrux, and her pen had been moving steadily in the shorthand she developed at McGonagall's kitchen table, the notation system that let her get every word while still listening fully, a skill McGonagall had called one of the most practically useful things a person can develop, and that Hermione had therefore refined to something approaching an art form. She looked up. "I want access to your library," she said to Dumbledore. "The restricted section, all of it." Dumbledore looked at her, then at Harry, then back. "Yes," he said, "I believe that's reasonable." McGonagall made a sound, not quite a protest, more the sound of someone filing the objection for the record. "Minerva," Dumbledore said. "I said nothing," she said. "Your expression said a considerable amount. My expression is my own business." Harry looked out the window at the grounds, where a warm June morning was making the grass very green and entirely irrelevant to the conversation, and thought about Horcruxes and the shape of the long war they were apparently in the middle of, and felt the same thing he'd felt since Dumbledore had first told him about the prophecy. Not dread, but the settled weight of someone who has accepted a destination and is now focused entirely on the route. He looked at Hermione's notebook. "Can I see what you've got so far?" She passed it across without looking up, still writing. He read through her notes, added 3 things in the margin in his own handwriting, a reference, a question, a connection she'd missed between 2 things Dumbledore had said, and passed it back. She read his additions, added 2 more things of her own, and underlined his connection. Dumbledore watched this. He said nothing. But his expression, when Harry glanced up, was the one that meant he was pleased about something he hadn't quite anticipated, and was deciding how much to show it. Harry spent July at Larkspur. Hermione spent the first 3 weeks in Edinburgh with McGonagall and the last week at Larkspur, which had become the arrangement by the second summer with the easy organic logic of something nobody had decided and everybody accepted. She arrived on a Saturday with 2 bags, her cat, a half-Kneazle named Archimedes, grey and imperious, and 4 books she'd borrowed from Dumbledore's restricted library, which she'd read twice each and was on the 3rd pass. Harry had dinner waiting because Dumbledore had gone to meet Flamel about the Horcrux research, and Harry had been cooking since he was 8 because the alternative was waiting for Dumbledore to come back, and Dumbledore kept unusual hours. She sat at the flagstone kitchen table and opened one of the books while she ate, which was exactly what Harry did when he was alone, and neither of them mentioned it. "The diary," she said, without looking up. Harry set down his fork. "Tell me. It's not in these books directly, but it's implied." She turned a page. "Horcrux objects have behavioral signatures, residual magical will, not just the soul fragment, but the intent encoded in the object at the moment of creation. A strong enough magical personality can imprint that intent on the vessel." She looked up. "Do you understand what that means?" "The Horcrux isn't just a container," Harry said. "It's a projection of the creator, frozen at the moment of creation." "Exactly, which means it can interact. If someone got hold of one of Voldemort's Horcruxes and it was the right kind, a written object, a communicative vessel, it could engage with them, pull them in, simulate him." She pushed the book across. "Dumbledore has a note in the margin here. He wrote it years ago. Look at the ink. He was worried about this before we were born." Harry looked at the margin note in Dumbledore's precise, small script. "Communicative potential, dangerous in unguided contact, seek vessel." He sat back. He was looking for a specific Horcrux. "A diary," Hermione said. "He mentioned Riddle used a diary in his early years. Slughorn confirmed it in a memory Dumbledore extracted years ago. He's been trying to find it." She closed the book with the careful deliberateness of someone putting down something important. "I don't think he's found it." "No," Harry said slowly. "He hasn't. He'd have told us. Or he's holding it back." "He isn't," Harry said with certainty. "Not after this past year. We made an agreement about information. He doesn't hold back anymore. A beat. But if he hasn't found it, it could be anywhere. Voldemort had followers, Death Eaters who didn't face Azkaban because they claimed coercion, the Malfoys." Hermione looked at him steadily. "Malfoy," she said. "Draco. His father," Harry said. "Lucius. Connected, wealthy, cleared at trial, positioned to protect objects Voldemort would have wanted kept safe." He picked up his fork again because the food was still there and the information would still be there after dinner. "We keep watching." She picked up her book again. Archimedes jumped onto the table and sat precisely on Harry's notes because that was the kind of cat he was. You know, Harry said, your cat is doing it again. He prefers primary sources to secondary analysis, Hermione said. He has standards. Outside, the Hogsmeade lights were coming up against the dimming sky, and the hills were going purple and dark, and the summer moved around them, warm and necessary, and building towards something that neither of them could see in full yet, but that both of them were pointed toward. The summer was productive in other ways. They trained every morning. Not dueling, not yet not formalized, but the systematic deepening of what they already had, the work Harry had been mapping since he was 8 and that Hermione had now integrated into a proper curriculum structure, because Hermione without a curriculum structure was Hermione at half capacity. She'd built a progression, 14 stages, each targeting a different dimension of magical ability, each one feeding the next. Wandless control, then wandless precision, then wandless power calibration, then the introduction of the wand as an extension rather than a crutch, then the layering of spell theory over instinct, then the beginnings of spell construction, the actual architecture of how spells worked, not just the incantation but the mechanism, the physics of magic, what Hermione called the grammar behind the vocabulary. Harry ran through it every morning at 7 before the dew was off the hills. Hermione joined him after the first week, initially to observe and correct and optimize the progression, and then because it turned out she also needed the physical structure of a morning practice to feel entirely herself. By the end of July they were both capable of things that would have alarmed their professors. Not flashy things, they were not interested in flashy, but precise, powerful, efficient things. Harry could hold a protego at full strength wandlessly for 3 minutes while running simultaneous casting with his wand hand. Hermione had, in the course of 3 weeks of dedicated work, cracked the theory of spell compression, the same magical output concentrated into half the verbal expression, then a third, then a gesture, then eventually a thought. That's not in any standard text, Harry said, watching her compress a reducto from full incantation to a flick of 2 fingers. No, she said. Are you inventing things again? I'm formalizing things that already exist in raw form, she said, slightly breathless, the exertion of compression requiring more focus than it looked. Experienced wizards do this intuitively, I'm just making the process explicit. So you're writing the book that should already exist? She thought about that. Yes, she said, I suppose I am. You should actually write it. She looked at him like he'd said something unexpectedly reasonable. After we finish second year, she said. Fair, he said. Again, from the wrist, this time less shoulder. She went again, and the focused line of her expression was the most purely alive Harry ever saw her, and he didn't say so because it wasn't the kind of thing you said without changing something, and what they had right now was working well enough that he wasn't in a hurry to change it. Dumbledore watched them from the cottage window one morning, a mug of tea in both hands, and thought about the word inevitable, about how it was possible to make something inevitable through patient, deliberate love, and whether that was different from fate and whether the difference mattered. He decided it mattered enormously, and then he went back inside and wrote to Nicholas Flamel about Horcrux theory, because there were still things to understand and summer was short. September arrived and Hogwarts received them back like a well-fitted coat. Second year was different from first in the specific way that knowing where things are changes your relationship to them. The moving staircases were navigation now rather than obstacle. The library was mapped. The teachers were known quantities. Harry moved through the first week with the settled ease of someone in their correct environment, noting the changes. New students in the lower years, a new defense against the dark arts teacher who was, by remarkable coincidence and a considerable quantity of published books himself, Gilderoy Lockhart. Harry sat in the first defense lesson and watched Lockhart describe himself for 40 minutes with the particular attention he gave to things that were most useful to understand, and understood him immediately and completely, a man of genuine surface charisma and almost no substance, who had spent his career taking credit for other wizards' work, and who was, underneath the smile and the gold-trimmed robes, frightened of being found out in a way that had become so constant he'd stopped noticing it. The fear was structural now, it had built itself into the architecture of who he was. He stole those memories, Hermione said after class in a voice that was not loud and was not uncertain. Yes, Harry said, from the actual witches and wizards who performed those feats, the obliviate on a gifted witch who defeated the band and banshee would require, she stopped walking. Actually, the skill required to perform a clean obliviate on a powerful magical practitioner without leaving traces is considerable. He's more capable than he appears. The specific kind of capable that's actually dangerous, Harry said. People who underestimate you and who have something to hide. She looked at him sideways. You're going to watch him. I'm going to watch everyone, he said. I always watch everyone. You watch some people more than others. Also true. They turned the corner into the main corridor, where the second-year Gryffindors were dispersing toward lunch, and Ron fell into step beside them with a chocolate frog he'd opened and was arguing with because the card was a repeat. Agrippa again, he said, with genuine personal offense, showing them the card. That's the 4th time I'm starting to think the universe is telling me something. The universe doesn't care about your card collection, Hermione said. You don't know that. Fairly confident. She's very confident, Harry told Ron. What did you make of Lockhart? Ron asked, falling into step. Ron had grown over the summer and was now half a head taller than Harry, which Harry found slightly annoying in the cheerful, low-stakes way of someone who didn't actually care. Fraud, Harry said. Ron blinked. What complete fraud, Hermione said, though an unusually skilled one in a very specific way. Ron stared at them both. He's written 12 books. Yes, Harry said, all about things other people did. Ron looked at the corridor, processing. How do you two always know things? We pay attention, Hermione said. To what? To everything, Harry said. Come on, I'm hungry. Ron, who was always hungry, required no further convincing. The first attack happened in October. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, was found petrified in a corridor on the second floor during the Halloween feast, with the message on the wall in dripping letters. The chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. The school went, to varying degrees, sideways. Harry stood in the corridor with the crowd of students who'd come out of the feast at the noise, looking at the writing and at Mrs. Norris and at the particular quality of the magic hanging in the air, recent, reptilian in texture, something with a warm, cold signature that wasn't quite either of those things, and thought about the diary. Hermione was beside him. He didn't need to look to know she was doing the same thing, the same catalogue, the same analysis. Basilisk, she said very quietly, for him alone. He looked at the wall. Possibly. The petrification pattern is consistent. She's not stunned. There's no magical force residue. She looked at something directly and survived it, which means she didn't meet its direct gaze. Reflection. Her voice was low and very fast, the processing voice she used when she was 3 steps ahead and choosing which one to share, which means whatever this is moves through the pipes. Salazar Slytherin's monster, Harry said. It's in the Hogwarts, a history supplement from 1742, not the main text. Most people don't read the supplement. She paused. The chamber is real, it's below the castle. The monster is old enough to kill without effort and someone is directing it. Someone opened the chamber, Harry said. Someone with a connection to Slytherin. She looked at him directly. Harry, the diary. He thought about it fast. A Horcrux with communicative capacity, an imprint of Tom Riddle at 16, capable of influence, capable of manipulation, capable of guiding someone toward the chamber itself. If someone found it, he said. If they're being used by it without knowing, or knowing and not caring, she said. Either way. He looked at the Slytherin students in the crowd. Draco Malfoy, arms crossed, with that particular expression of performance that had gotten more readable over the past year, the smirk that wasn't satisfaction, the confidence that wasn't confidence. He caught Harry's eye and held it for a beat, then looked away. He wasn't doing it. Harry felt that in his gut and trusted his gut when it came supported by evidence. Malfoy was performing air for his audience, but the performance was too wide, too theatrical, too much the thing a scared boy did when the world seemed to be confirming everything he'd been raised to believe without having any of the actual power that was supposed to come with it. Not him, Harry thought, but his father. Lucius Malfoy gave someone the diary, Harry said. We need to find out who. We need to find the chamber first, Hermione said, and the monster's movement path. She looked at the floor, the ceiling, the pipes running along the upper wall. The pipes. I want to see the plumbing layout of this castle. You want to see the plumbing, Harry said. Don't be snobby about infrastructure, she said. Empires fall to plumbing problems. She was already moving, already turning the problem over, and Harry followed because she was right. She was always right about the angle of approach, even when the destination seemed absurd. Filch was making sounds over Mrs. Norris. Snape was directing students back to the feast with the authority of someone who will not be argued with. McGonagall was looking at the wall with the expression of someone who has just been given information that is worse than what they feared. Harry caught her eye as he turned to follow Hermione. She looked at him, a quick, comprehensive exchange, the wordless communication of two people who have been in each other's orbit long enough. He gave her a slight nod. We're on it. Her expression returned, be careful. His returned, always. Her expression returned something that was harder to read and that he thought, with the particular sensitivity he'd developed for McGonagall over the past year, might have been, I know and I hate that I trust you to be. He went after Hermione. They found the plumbing diagram in the Hogwarts architectural records, which lived in a cabinet in the library's historical section that most students walked past without registering because it was unlabeled and brown, and between two more obviously interesting things. Hermione had catalogued the entire historical section on her 4th day of first year. The diagram was from 1312, a comprehensive rendering of the castle's water system drawn in the meticulous style of medieval architectural documentation, with additions and amendments layered on top in different inks across the centuries. The oldest sections of the piping, the parts drawn in faded brown ink that was nearly illegible, ran in a pattern that had nothing to do with the current castle's water supply and everything to do with something that predated the current castle's foundation. There, Hermione said, tracing a line with her finger. These pipes run directly beneath the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, the one that's permanently out of service because of the ghost. Moaning Myrtle, Harry said. Her name was Myrtle Warren. She died in 1943. Hermione traced the line further. And this passage goes down here. Look at the depth markers. It's at least 60 feet below the current castle floor. 1943, Harry said. She looked at him. Riddle was 16 in 1943, he said. He was a student. He found the chamber as a student and someone was killed. That was the recorded incident. A girl found dead. The school nearly closed. That's when they expelled Hagrid, blamed him. Tom Riddle put it on Hagrid, Hermione said, and her voice had the particular flatness it got when she encountered something that offended her at a deep level. A 14-year-old boy. He was already what he was, Harry said, or close to it. She looked at the map for a moment. Myrtle died in that bathroom, she said slowly. In 1943, and she's been haunting that bathroom ever since. She looked up. She saw something. Whatever killed her, she saw it, or she saw it indirectly, which is why she's not a petrification but an actual death, and she stayed because she hasn't left, Harry said. She's been in that bathroom for 50 years and we've never thought to ask her what she saw. 50 years of people walking past and not asking, Hermione said with something that sounded like anger on Myrtle's behalf. Let's go ask, Harry said. Now, do you have something else on? She closed the diagram, rolled it with careful hands and replaced it in its slot. No, she said, let's go. Myrtle Warren was not what Harry had expected, which was useful information in itself because his expectations were usually calibrated. She was not primarily grief. She was primarily rage, which had calcified over 50 years into something that looked like grief from the outside, but was at its core the burning injustice of someone killed for no reason by something that had no business being in a girl's bathroom, whose death was blamed on a boy who had nothing to do with it, whose story had been erased so completely that even her murderer, Riddle, had framed it as an accident involving a monster Hagrid had kept. She haunted the S-bend of her toilet because she was furious. She cried because fury had nowhere to go in a body that no longer had the options fury requires. Harry sat on the bathroom floor across from her toilet and listened to her tell it, not the polished version, not the one she'd told 100 curious students who'd wandered in over the decades, the real one. He asked the right questions, which meant he asked questions that gave her room to be angry rather than questions that reduced her to her ending. She told him about the eyes. I was crying, she said, with the old defiance of someone who has had 50 years to be unembarrassed about it. Olive Hornby had said something about my glasses and I came in here and I heard a voice, a boy's voice, speaking in something that wasn't English, hissing, sort of. From the pipes from that sink, she pointed to the sink in the far corner, the one with the broken tap. And I came out to see what it was and I looked and that's, she stopped. The rage flattened for just a moment into something rower. I'm sorry, Harry said. She blinked. Ghost didn't have tear ducts, but the motion was there. Most people aren't, she said. Most people are thoughtless, he said. It's not the same as not caring, but the effect is similar and that's not fair to you. She looked at him with the particular look of someone who has not been seen properly in a very long time. Then she looked at the sink. The tap, she said. The broken one. There's a mark on it, a snake. When the voice came from the pipes I could see it. The mark lit up. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione was already moving toward the sink, crouching in front of it with her wand out, running a detection charm along the copper. There's a trigger, she said, woven into the plumbing. The response would require, she looked up at him. Parseltongue. Myrtle made a sound. The voice in the pipes, she said. It was hissing. It was Parseltongue, Harry said. A magical language. Some wizards can speak to snakes, and this, he stood and came to the sink, crouched beside Hermione, looked at the small engraved mark on the tap base. A coiled snake, barely visible, decades of grime in the crevices. He looked at it and felt the pull of it, the language that lived in him the same way wandless magic lived in him, without explanation, without effort, something the night of the killing curse had either given or revealed. Can you open it? Hermione asked, looking at him directly. Yes, he said. He looked at the snake on the tap and said in the language that wasn't English, the language that sounded like what water sounds like when it knows where it's going, open. The sink moved. Dramatically, not with earthquake and spectacle. It simply unlocked, the pipes reconfiguring with the grinding precision of very old engineering, and the floor around it shifted and opened into a wide vertical passage going straight down into darkness. The three of them, Myrtle too, hovering, looked into it. That's a long way down, Hermione observed. 60 feet minimum, Harry said, based on the diagram. The diagram didn't show what was at the bottom. No, she looked at the passage. Looked at her, she was doing the thing where she ran the calculation, risk versus information, resources, preparation, and he gave her the time she needed because she always arrived at the right answer faster when she wasn't rushed. Not tonight, she said. We're not prepared. We need to know more about the monster before we go into its home. Agreed, he said, and we need to tell Dumbledore. Also agreed. She looked at him with slight suspicion. You're agreeing very readily. Because you're right, he said. Going in blind at night is tactically stupid. I'm not interested in being tactically stupid. She relaxed by a fraction. Good, she stood. We need to research the monster. I have a theory. Basilisk, Harry said. Obviously basilisk, but the specific subspecies matters. The age matters. A basilisk old enough to have been Slytherin's monster would be over 1,000 years old, which would make it the oldest living basilisk on record by at least 4 centuries, which means its venom would be. She stopped herself. I'll research it. Can you get into Dumbledore's library without him knowing? He wouldn't restrict me if I asked, Harry said. I know, I meant tonight without a conversation that would have him want to come with us. She paused. I want to scope the chamber before we bring adults in. He raised an eyebrow. McGonagall would say that's exactly the kind of reasoning that gets capable people into preventable trouble. McGonagall would be right, Hermione said, and I'd like to see it first anyway. She picked up her bag from the bathroom floor with the composure of someone who regularly put her bag on bathroom floors in the service of research. I'll write to Minerva tonight. Not about the chamber specifically, about basilisk theory. She'll think I'm curious about serpentine magical history. She'll know exactly what you're doing, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said, but she'll also know I have a reason and she trusts my reasons. She said it with the steady certainty of someone who has built that trust over 9 years of being consistently worth trusting. Come on, I need the library. They went. Myrtle watched them leave from her toilet and felt something she hadn't felt in 50 years, which was not quite hope but was the adjacent quality, the sense that something was finally moving in the right direction. The diary appeared in November. Harry found it because he was paying attention to Ginny Weasley, and he'd been paying attention to Ginny Weasley since September because she had the particular quality of someone who is gradually losing themselves, and that quality was frightening to observe in someone who had been so fully present at the start of term. She was Ron's sister, 11 years old in her first year. She'd started term with the nervous, bright-eyed energy of someone who had been told about Hogwarts their entire life, and had arrived to find it was real, a palpable wonder, slightly overwhelming, with the added complication of sharing a castle with Harry Potter, about whom she had apparently quite strong feelings that her brothers found endlessly entertaining and that Harry found touching and slightly sad, because the version of him she admired was the public one, the story version. And he knew how little that version had to do with who he actually was. By October something had changed. The wonder had gone flat. She was quieter, forgetting things, losing track of conversations mid-sentence. She started looking at her left hand sometimes when she thought no one was watching, checking something, reassuring herself about something. Harry noticed in the first week of October. He mentioned it to Hermione, who noticed it herself in the second week and confirmed his assessment in the third. Something's using her, Hermione said, over their usual evening study spot in the library. She said it without drama, which was the most alarming way to say it. The pattern is consistent with compulsion and memory extraction. The diary, Harry said. Yes, she'd been building toward this conclusion for a week and had the citations stacked to support it. Riddle's diary found her or was given to her. Her father is Arthur Weasley, Harry said. He works against dark objects in the Ministry. He's exactly the kind of person Lucius Malfoy would want to get at. He paused. Ginny gets a book. She's told it's a school book or a journal. She's 11 and she writes in it and it writes back, and it's been cultivating her for months. And directing her, Hermione said quietly. The attacks, Harry, she's been losing time around each one. She's not doing it consciously. No, but Hermione stopped. Her expression had something in it that was not just analytical, there was anger in it, and it was personal. The particular anger of someone who understands what it means to have your mind interfered with by something that has no right to it. We need to get the diary away from her, before she harms someone who can't survive petrification or before she goes into the chamber herself. Riddle is building to something, Harry said. In 50 years in a diary, his goal is a body probably, or at minimum a full manifestation. He'd need to drain someone enough to, he stopped working it out. He'd need Ginny to go into the chamber as a sacrifice. Hermione looked at him steadily. Then we go to the chamber first. We're not ready, he said. You said so. I've been researching for 3 weeks, she said. I'm significantly more ready than I was 3 weeks ago, and Ginny Weasley is running out of time. She met his eyes, and there it was, the quality that was easy to miss in Hermione because it lived under the precision and the rigor, but that was actually the deepest thing in her, the inability to walk past someone who was being hurt, the flat refusal to let the analytical override the human. We get the diary first if we can. How? She keeps it in her bag, Hermione said. I've watched her check it, left pocket of her school bag, the interior one. She paused. I'm not going to steal from an 11-year-old. No, he agreed, but we could give her something better. Hermione looked at him. What? A reason to trust us? He looked at his hands on the table. She doesn't know us. She knows the idea of us, but she's lonely and she's frightened, and something has been talking to her every night for months, and the alternative we're offering is silence. He paused. What if it's not silence? Hermione was quiet for a moment. You want to befriend her. I want to actually be kind to her, which is different. He looked up. She's being used by something that pretends to understand her. If she had an actual person, she wouldn't need the diary, Hermione finished. Then that will take time we might not have. Do you have a faster option that doesn't involve stealing from a child? She looked at the table. She didn't. No, she said. All right. They started carefully. Harry talked to Ginny first. Because Hermione talking to people she wanted to help had a tendency to feel like being helped by a very efficient machine, and Ginny needed something warmer than that right now. He sat next to her at breakfast one Thursday in November and asked about her charms class and listened to her answer without performance, without the weight of the famous name, just a 15-minute conversation between two people sharing a table. The difference in her was immediate and visible. She sat up half an inch. She made eye contact without flinching. She said something funny about Professor Flitwick's teaching method and then looked surprised at herself for saying it, as if laughter had become unfamiliar. Harry laughed, genuinely because it was funny. She looked at him like she was recalibrating something. Hermione came 3 days later after Harry had done the groundwork and sat across from Ginny in the common room and said, "Can I see your charms homework? I'm trying to understand how first years are being taught the theory. I think the sequencing is backward and I want to compare." It was not the warmest opening, but Hermione's genuine interest in the problem was legible to anyone paying attention, and Ginny was a perceptive child who had been starved of genuine things for 2 months. She handed over the homework. Hermione looked at it seriously, said 3 things about the theory that were genuinely useful, and asked Ginny if she'd thought about the resonance problem in the 4th exercise. Ginny had actually, she had a thought about it that she'd been embarrassed to put on paper. Hermione said, "That's a better approach than the textbook suggests, write it down," and something thawed. By the end of November, Ginny was sitting with them in the library on Thursday evenings, initially just studying in the same space, then occasionally asking questions, then occasionally being asked questions herself, the gradual expansion of trust that happens when people are consistently and without agenda present for each other. The diary came up in the 2nd week of December. Not as a confession, Ginny didn't know she had anything to confess. She mentioned it as you mention a habit. "I keep a journal, I've been writing in it since September." The way she said it, the slight shift in her posture, the way her left hand moved toward her bag without her noticing, all of it visible to Harry who was watching and to Hermione who was watching more. "What do you write about?" Harry asked, naturally interested. "Oh, just things." A pause. "It's useful writing things down, it helps me think." "Does it write back?" Hermione asked. Question landed. Ginny's face did several things in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, a flash of something frightened, and then the managed blankness of someone trying to unsay the reaction. "What?" she said. "The journal," Hermione said, keeping her voice very even. "Does it respond to what you write? Some journals have charm work built in. I'm curious about the mechanism." "It's just a journal," Ginny said. "It's just—" She stopped. The frightened thing was back, wider now. "How did you know?" "We've been paying attention," Harry said quietly, directly. Not to spy on you, we were worried. There's something in that journal that isn't a journal, Ginny, something that's been," he chose the word carefully, "feeding on you." She was white. "That's not— You lose time," Hermione said. "Around the attacks on the students, you check your left hand because you find ink on it that you don't remember writing. You've been getting quieter and more frightened since October, and you haven't told anyone because you're not sure what there is to tell." She paused. "We're not angry with you. You didn't do this. Something did it to you." Ginny's hands were in her lap, pressed flat, the way you press something to stop it moving. Her eyes were bright and not quite crying. "I didn't mean," she started. "We know," Harry said. "I didn't hurt anyone deliberately." "We know that," Hermione said. "The journal used you. That's the entire point of what it is. It's a dark object, old and sophisticated and designed to manipulate." She leaned forward slightly. "Will you let us help you?" Ginny looked at them both. She was 11 years old and she'd been carrying something horrible and completely alone for 3 months, and here were 2 people who knew about it and were not running and were not accusing her and were not performing shock. "The journal is in my room," she said. "Can you get it?" Harry asked. She nodded, stood, and went. She came back in 4 minutes with a small black diary, T.M. Riddle embossed on the front cover, and put it on the table between them with the expression of someone putting down something that has been extremely heavy for a very long time. Harry picked it up. He could feel it immediately, the presence in it, the compressed magical will, the cold intelligence wound into every page. He opened it and the pages were blank in a way that felt occupied rather than empty, the way a room feels occupied even when no one is visibly in it. He took out his quill. "Hello, Tom," he wrote. The response came immediately in ink that rose out of the page as if from below the surface. "Hello. I didn't expect this." "I know," Harry wrote. "You expected Ginny. She is considerably more useful than whatever you are." Harry felt Hermione reading over his shoulder. He wrote, "I'm Harry Potter." A long pause, then, "You recognize the name." "I recognize the significance." A pause. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of your main form either," Harry wrote. "The one that's been wearing Quirrell." He paused. "He died, by the way." Another pause longer. "You engaged with him directly." "Yes, and you're here now, whole and apparently well, which means you survived something that killed a fully formed wizard." The writing on the page had the quality of genuine thought rather than performance. "Who raised you?" "Dumbledore," Harry wrote. "I've known about you since I was 7, the longest pause yet. Then that explains rather a lot." Another beat. "You're here to destroy me." "Yes," Harry wrote, "but I wanted to talk to you first." Sentiment, curiosity, Harry wrote. "You were brilliant once, or the person you were made from was. 16 and already constructing Horcruxes, already maneuvering Hogwarts. There's a kind of achievement in that, even if it's monstrous." Flattery. Fact, Harry wrote. "What I'm curious about is whether the fragment of you that lives in this diary still has enough of that intelligence to understand that it's finished." "You're trying to destabilize me," the diary wrote. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation with a piece of a person," Harry wrote back, "before I do what I came here to do." Hermione, beside him, quietly uncorked a vial she'd taken from her bag, basilisk venom, which she absolutely should not have had and which she'd spent 6 weeks sourcing through a chain of alchemical supply catalogues under false names specifically because she'd known it would come to this. The most complete destroyer of Horcrux objects, irreversible. The diary seemed to feel it. The ink went frantic for a moment, pages twitching. "Wait," it wrote. "No," Harry wrote, "that's not honest. There's nothing to wait for." And then Hermione opened the vial over the pages, a single precise pour, and Tom Riddle's diary screamed not in sound but in the sensation of something that has been holding itself together for 40 years losing hold in a single unraveling moment. The pages blackened, the ink boiled and disappeared. The presence, the compressed, cold, waiting intelligence, dissolved from the object like smoke from a fire that's been fully extinguished, nothing remaining, nothing preserved. The diary was a ruined book. Ginny, who had been watching with her hands over her mouth, let out a long, shaking breath. It's gone, Hermione said, and her voice was precise and gentle in equal measure. It can't hurt you or anyone else. Ginny looked at the blackened book for a moment. Then she started crying, not quietly, not with the restrained control of someone performing upset, but the full, exhausted, releasing way of someone who has been holding something terrible for months and has just put it down. Hermione moved her chair over and put her arm around Ginny's shoulders. It was not the natural gesture for Hermione. She was not physically demonstrative by inclination, but she did it without hesitation, firmly and warmly, and Ginny leaned into it and cried, and Harry put the ruined diary in his bag and looked at the window and gave them both the space of his quiet. Later, when Ginny had settled, Harry said, "There's still the chamber." She looked up, red-eyed. "The thing in the pipes." "It's still there," he said. "It's not connected to the diary anymore, but it's old and it's alive and it needs to be resolved." "Will you?" "Yes," he said. "Should I tell someone, a teacher?" Harry looked at Hermione. She looked at him. "Professor McGonagall," Hermione said to Ginny. "Tell her exactly what you told us. She will be," a pause, choosing words with care. "She will not be angry with you. She is very fair and she is very thorough and she will not let anything happen to you." Ginny nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They went to the chamber on a Sunday. McGonagall knew. Of course she did. Ginny had gone to her Saturday evening and McGonagall had sat with her for 2 hours, and then she had come to find Hermione in the common room with the particular expression she wore when she was furious about a situation and was choosing to be measured about it because fury would not serve anyone. "You found the entry point," she said. "Yes," Hermione said. "And you intend to go in?" "Yes." McGonagall looked at her for a long moment. "I should come with you." "You should," Hermione agreed, "but you can't speak Parseltongue and neither can anyone else in this building except Harry, and the door won't open without it." "I could, Minerva." Hermione said it quietly, using the name she'd called her guardian in private since she was 4 years old, the name that only came out in moments of real weight. "We've prepared for this. We know the monster, we know the countermeasure, we know the layout from the historical diagram. We're not going in blind." McGonagall was quiet. The thing that crossed her face was readable to Hermione and possibly only to Hermione, the particular grief of a parent who has raised someone so capable that they're right, and who has to decide in real time whether loving someone means protecting them from every risk or trusting what you've built. "If anything goes wrong," McGonagall said, "you signal me immediately. I will be at the entry point. I will be listening." "You'll be cold," Hermione said. "It's stone all the way down." "I am aware of my own tolerance for cold," McGonagall said. "Don't be clever at me right now." "Sorry," Hermione said, and meant it. "How are you going to deal with the gaze?" McGonagall asked. "The basilisk's killing gaze, mirrors," Harry said from the doorway where he'd appeared quietly. "Small ones. If we can only see its reflection, we can direct it without dying." He paused. "And I can speak to it." McGonagall looked at him. "You intend to try to communicate?" "I intend to tell it that its master is gone," he said. "It's been in that chamber for 1,000 years following an instruction that's no longer valid. That deserves an honest conversation." The deputy headmistress of Hogwarts stared at Harry Potter for a moment with the expression of someone who has been consistently surprised by a child for the past 15 months and is still not entirely used to it. "Be careful," she said finally. "Always," he said. "You say that," she said, "and I almost believe you." "You do believe me," he said gently. "That's why you're not coming with us." She held his gaze for a moment, and then looked away, and that was, by McGonagall standards, the clearest confirmation available. The Chamber of Secrets was, in Harry's assessment, extraordinary, not beautiful, not in the conventional sense. It was old in a way that made everything else feel provisional. The massive stone columns carved with serpents winding upward into the dark, the pale light coming from somewhere that wasn't an obvious source, the air cold and old and tasting of water and stone, and something that had lived here since before anyone currently alive had been born. The basilisk was enormous. It moved in the dark between the columns with the slow inevitability of something that has never needed to hurry, and when it found them, by sound, by scent, by some serpentine awareness that wasn't quite sight, it stopped, and the two small humans holding mirrors on extendable handles met its indirect gaze in reflection and did not die. Harry spoke to it in Parseltongue. He told it the truth, that its master, the boy who had first opened this chamber, was gone. The fragment of him in the diary had been destroyed. The larger presence that had tried to return through Quirrell was a ghost of itself, routed and retreated. The directive it had followed for 1,000 years had no living authority behind it anymore. The basilisk listened, and then it said something in the slow, ancient register of a creature that has existed so long it treats sentences as negotiations. "The air commanded me to cleanse the unworthy. The air speaks through the air's line." "The air's line is broken," Harry said. "The air chose destruction over everything else and has been destroyed. I am the one who stopped him. I speak to you now. A long, thinking silence. You speak our tongue. Yes, that was the heir's gift to his line. Another pause. You are not of his line. No, Harry said. It was given to me differently. He kept his eyes on the mirror. The basilisk's reflection was enormous, golden-eyed, its scales the color of ancient copper. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to tell you that you can stop the hunts, stop the chamber. There are no unworthy. That was his idea, not a truth. He used you for 1,000 years to serve something that wasn't worth serving. The basilisk was quiet for so long that Hermione beside Harry shifted her weight and said very quietly in English, "Is it working?" "I don't know yet," Harry said also quietly. More silence. Then the basilisk said in the ancient way of old things making unfamiliar decisions, "I am tired." "I know," Harry said. 1,000 years is long to carry something. What happens to me if I stop? It was the most human question Harry had heard in a long time, coming from something that was not human at all, and he felt the weight of it. He thought about what he could promise and what he couldn't. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but no one will hurt you if you're not hurting anyone. And Dumbledore, the man I live with, he would want to know that you exist and he would want to talk to you. He cares about creatures that most people don't bother with." Another long pause. "Then the one they call Dumbledore, even the portraits speak of him. He'd be pleased to know that," Harry said. "He has a complex relationship with his own legacy." The basilisk made a sound that might have been the serpentine equivalent of something between understanding and amusement. "You are a strange speaker." "I've been told," Harry said. "I will not hunt," the basilisk said finally, with the deliberate finality of a thing that does not make decisions lightly. "If the one called Dumbledore comes and speaks to me, I will listen." "Thank you," Harry said. He and Hermione walked back through the chamber without hurrying, their mirror handles catching the faint light, the sound of the basilisk settling somewhere in the deep dark behind them like a tide going out. The columns rose on either side, the serpent carvings watching without judgment. "Well," Hermione said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "That was, I know. 1,000-year-old basilisk just agreed to a ceasefire." "It was tired," Harry said. "You can do a lot with tired if you're honest about it." She thought about that. They reached the entrance passage and began the long climb back toward the bathroom and the light. "Dumbledore's going to want to come talk to a basilisk," she said. "He's going to be thrilled," Harry said. "He loves this kind of thing." "McGonagall is going to be—" "I know what McGonagall is going to be," Harry said. "Multiple things in sequence." "Yes," Hermione said, "in a very specific order." They climbed. Above them the bathroom, the castle, the cold December light. McGonagall, sitting on the cold floor of the third-floor corridor with her back to the wall and a warming charm around herself, waiting as she had said she would. They came up through the sink passage into the bathroom, and she was through the door in 4 seconds, and she looked at them both, whole, unhurt, upright, carrying mirrors on extendable handles and their school bags, and she did the fastest assessment Harry had ever seen her do, which was really saying something. "You're all right," she said. "Completely," Hermione said. McGonagall looked at her for one more second, then she said, "Report everything, in order." She turned toward the corridor. "And walk while you do it. I've been on that floor for 2 hours and I'd rather brief while moving." They walked and reported in order while the December castle moved around them, and Harry listened to Hermione describe the basilisk's communication and the resolution with the precision and completeness of someone whose guardian had taught her that a good debrief was a form of respect. McGonagall listened without interrupting. This was remarkable for McGonagall. When Hermione finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The basilisk agreed," she said. "Yes," Harry said, "to a ceasefire, and to speak with Dumbledore, because you asked it, because I was honest with it," he said, "and because it was tired." McGonagall walked 3 more steps in silence, then she said, "I will never tell Albus that this outcome pleases me deeply. He is already insufferably self-satisfied about the quality of his choices." "I won't say anything," Harry said. "Neither will I," Hermione said, and the corner of her mouth was doing the thing it did when she was trying very hard not to smile. "See that you don't," McGonagall said, and her own voice had something warm in it that she absolutely did not acknowledge, and they walked back to the main corridor while the December afternoon settled over Hogwarts and the castle held all of it, the chamber below and the students above and the ancient creature in the dark and the 3 people who had, in their particular and specific way, made the world slightly better than it had been 3 hours ago. Chapter 4, The Year of Wolves and Rats. The summer before 3rd year, Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban. Harry heard about it the same way he heard about most things that Dumbledore thought he should know immediately. Over breakfast, directly, without preamble, the old man setting down his teacup and saying, "Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban last night. I thought you should hear it from me first." Harry set down his toast. "Tell me about him." Dumbledore did. The full account, the friendship with James, the apparent betrayal, the 12 Muggle deaths, the destroyed street, the laughter in the rubble. Peter Pettigrew's finger found at the scene. Azkaban, 12 years, escape, unprecedented method unknown. Harry listened with the focused stillness he brought to information that required processing rather than reaction. When Dumbledore finished, he said, "You believe he did it?" "The evidence at the time was compelling," Dumbledore said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Dumbledore looked at him over his glasses. The morning light was coming through the cottage window onto the flagstones, and outside the hills were the vivid green of a Scottish July. "No," he said, "it is not what you asked." He paused in the way he paused when he was choosing between versions of honesty. I have had doubts for some time. The evidence was compelling and I was not thinking clearly in those days, after Lily, after James, after you. He folded his hands on the table. I did not investigate as thoroughly as I should have. Harry sat with that. If he's innocent, then a man has spent 12 years in Azkaban for something he didn't do, Dumbledore said. Yes, what do you need to prove it? Pettigrew, Dumbledore said. Alive. Harry thought about that, about a finger, about 12 Muggle deaths and a man laughing in the rubble. About the particular impossibility of someone laughing at that, and what that laugh actually meant, not triumph, but the specific sound of someone who has realized that everything they feared has come true and that there is nothing left to lose. He's coming to Hogwarts, Harry said, not a question. The Ministry believes he intends to find you. It's their working theory. Dumbledore's voice was neutral. There will be Dementors at the school this year, the Ministry insists. I don't want Dementors at the school, Harry said, nor do I said so clearly. A pause. The Ministry was not persuaded, because Fudge is more worried about appearances than students, Harry said without heat, just accuracy. His priorities are, yes, somewhat differently ordered than my own. Dumbledore looked out the window. There is also a new defense teacher this year, Remus Lupin. He was one of your father's closest friends. Harry went very still. How close? The four of them, James, Sirius, Remus and Peter, were inseparable. Remus knew your father better than almost anyone living. A beat. He also knew Sirius Black very well. He has his own doubts, I believe, though he has not said so to me directly. He is careful, Remus. He has learned to be careful. Why? Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that preceded information he'd been holding for a specific reason. He is a werewolf, he said. Bitten as a child. He has spent his life managing it with skill and discretion, and it has cost him a great deal in terms of employment and community and the general willingness of the wizarding world to see him as a person rather than a condition. He paused. I am telling you this so you understand him before you meet him, not to use against him. I don't use things against people, Harry said. I know, Dumbledore said. I tell you anyway because trust should be informed. Harry nodded. He looked out the window at the hills and thought about a man called Remus Lupin who had lost everyone at once, 2 friends apparently dead, one apparently a murderer, and had spent 12 years alone with that, and was now coming back to the place it had all started to teach a boy who'd been raised by someone other than any of them. He's going to find me strange, Harry said. Almost certainly, Dumbledore agreed. I don't look like I've been through loss, Harry said with the clinical self-awareness that was one of the things that occasionally unsettled people who expected him to be something else. People who knew my parents expect a certain kind of wound. I don't have that, not the visible kind. You have your own wounds, Dumbledore said gently. Different ones, Harry said, from different things. He stood and picked up his toast again. Hermione's coming Friday. I know, Dumbledore said with the mild serenity of someone who is always 7 steps ahead of the social calendar. She's going to want to talk about Black. She usually wants to talk about everything. Yes, Harry said and ate his toast. Hermione arrived Friday with Archimedes, 4 books on criminal law in the wizarding world, and an expression that said she had already formed a preliminary hypothesis and was waiting for the right moment to present it. She waited until she'd put her bags in her room, eaten the lunch Harry had made, and settled at the kitchen table with her notes. Sirius Black, she said. Yes, Harry said, sitting across from her. He didn't get a trial, she said. She put the first book on the table. I found it in the historical records of the Wizengamot. There is no record of a trial for Sirius Orion Black. He was committed to Azkaban by direct ministerial order in November 1981. No hearing, no wand examination, no testimony. Harry looked at her. That's illegal. Deeply, specifically and thoroughly illegal under 3 separate sections of the Wizengamot Charter of 1754. Her voice was precise, but there was something underneath it, the anger that emerged when she encountered institutional failure used against a person. In the chaos after Voldemort's fall, nobody checked, or if they checked, they didn't push. Dumbledore had influence, enormous influence, and he didn't push either. He was grieving, Harry said. He told me. Grief is not an excuse for what happened to Sirius Black, she said flatly. No, Harry agreed. It's an explanation, not an excuse. He knows that. She was quiet for a moment, something moving in her face. If Black is innocent, then we need to prove it, Harry said. Pettigrew alive. A man everyone believes has been dead for 12 years. She opened the second book. I've been looking at the Animagus records, the registered ones. Your father was registered James Potter Stagg, but registration is voluntary and Pettigrew wasn't registered, Harry said slowly. There's no record of him in the registry, which either means he wasn't an animagus or he was hiding it, Harry said, like he was hiding everything else. About it, the shape of a man who betrayed his friends to a dark lord and then faked his death and lived for 12 years. He's still alive. He has to be, Hermione said, hidden in a form no one would think to check. She looked at Harry, small, undetectable, somewhere with access to food and safety. A rat, Harry said. The word landed between them with the particular weight of an answer that fits too perfectly. Scabbers, Hermione said. Ron's rat, old, grey, missing a toe. Perpetually ill-looking, perpetually surviving. He's been with the Weasley family for 12 years, Harry said. Since the year Pettigrew disappeared. He'd be safe there, Hermione said. A pure-blood wizarding family, high-visibility, Order of Merlin connections. Pettigrew would know everything about Voldemort's movements through the Weasleys simply by living in their house. And when Voldemort returned, she stopped. He could go back to his master. Not yet, Harry said. Voldemort doesn't have a body yet. Pettigrew is hiding until there's somewhere to go. They sat with it, the full shape of it, the horrible elegance of a man who had traded everything for survival and had survived in the worst possible way, hiding in plain sight while an innocent man rotted in Azkaban. We need to find a way to expose him, Hermione said, before Black tries to get to him and it goes wrong. Black doesn't know where he is, Harry said. He escaped from Azkaban. He's motivated. She paused. He could hurt someone trying to get to Pettigrew. If he doesn't know, then we need to talk to Black before he does something irreversible, Harry said. She stared at him. He's a fugitive. The Ministry thinks he's after you. The Ministry is wrong about most things this year, Harry said. And a man who hasn't seen daylight in 12 years is not going to be reassured by the Ministry. But he'd talk to you, she said slowly. He'd have to, Harry said. I'm James's son. I'm why he's been in Azkaban in his mind, because he failed. Because Pettigrew warned Voldemort and James and Lily died and I was the only one left. He looked at his hands. If he's innocent, then every day in that place was about that. He needs to know I know. She looked at him for a long moment. You've thought about this carefully. I've had a week. You always think carefully, she said. I meant you've thought about it personally. He held her gaze. He was my father's best friend. If he's innocent, he's someone who loved my parents and has spent 12 years in the worst prison in the world for it. A beat. Yes, I've thought about it personally. Hermione was quiet. Then she said, we'll need to be careful about how we expose Pettigrew. He'll transform the moment he realizes he's caught. We need to prevent that. Locking spell maintained, Harry said. Or something that targets the animagus transformation specifically. I'll look into that, she said, already reaching for her notebook. Hermione, you just accepted that we're going to catch a man everyone thinks has been dead for 12 years. I accepted it 30 seconds ago when the evidence made it obvious, she said, writing. What's your point? He almost smiled. No point, he said, just noting. She looked up at him briefly, pen still moving. Something in her expression was warm and annoyed and fond all at once. The particular cocktail that was becoming very characteristic of how she looked at him when he said something that was both obvious and entirely worth saying. Read the third book, she said. It's on animagus transformation physiology. I've marked the relevant sections. He reached for the book. Third year at Hogwarts began with Dementors, which was both expected and worse than expected. They were on the train when the first one came. Harry felt it before the compartment door opened, a cold that wasn't temperature, a dropping away sensation like the ground deciding to be somewhere else, the specific drain of something that consumed happiness as a function of its existence. He'd been told about Dementors. The telling and the experience were, as was often the case, quite different things. The compartment had Ron and Neville in it, and a new occupant, a thin, tired-looking man with prematurely grey hair who had been asleep against the window for the first 2 hours of the journey. Professor Lupin, going back to Hogwarts. Harry had noticed him when they boarded and hadn't said anything, because Lupin was asleep and the sleep looked like it mattered. When the cold hit the compartment, Ron went pale and Neville made a small sound and Lupin came awake immediately, not groggily, not confused, but cleanly alert in the way of someone whose survival instincts were honed sharp by a life that required them. He had chocolate out and a patronus half formed before the door opened. Harry sat without flinching. He felt the cold, felt the pull of it, the edge of old grief, the distant echo of a woman screaming that he knew theoretically but had never heard directly, something that lived at the absolute back of his memory in the place before memory, and he acknowledged it and held himself anyway, the way Dumbledore had taught him to hold difficult things, with presence rather than resistance. Hermione, beside him, had her wand drawn. The light she produced was not quite a patronus. Not yet. The charm was notoriously difficult, but it was something, a focused projection of magical warmth that pushed against the cold with genuine force. Not student-level output, something more. Lupin looked at her, then at Harry, who was upright and steady. Then back at the corridor where the Dementor had already retreated from the combined resistance, Lupin's patronus, Harry's presence, Hermione's projection. Eat this, Lupin said, breaking chocolate and passing pieces around. His voice was quiet and kind in the direct, genuine way of someone who knows what they're doing and doesn't need to perform it. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Lupin looked at him. It was a look Harry recognized, the one that people who had known James Potter gave him, that adjustment, that reorientation. But Lupin's version was more complicated than most, and Harry let him have the moment. You know who I am, Lupin said. Dumbledore told me you'd be on the train, Harry said. I didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed the sleep. Something moved in Lupin's face. That was considerate, thank you. He looked at Hermione. That was an impressive defensive cast, not quite a patronus. Not yet, she said. I've been working on the theoretical framework. The mechanism requires a specific quality of focus that I'm still refining. What's the barrier for you? Lupin asked with the genuine curiosity of a teacher who is actually interested. She considered, and Harry watched her do something she didn't often do with people she'd just met. She answered honestly rather than deflecting. The patronus requires a specific happy memory as a focal point, she said. I've found that single memories are insufficient for me. The warmth dissipates before the charm fully forms. I've been experimenting with using a broader, emotional anchor. Something ongoing rather than a past moment. That's an interesting adaptation, Lupin said. I've never heard of anyone approaching it that way. Most books don't mention it as an option, she said, which I find frustrating because the emotional architecture of the charm is complex enough that a single solution seems reductive, Lupin said. She looked at him, reassessing. Yes, exactly. What anchor do you use? He asked. She glanced at Harry for a fraction of a second, so brief it almost wasn't there. A relationship, she said, rather than a memory. Lupin followed her glance and understood something that he didn't name. He passed more chocolate around. We should arrive in about 40 minutes, he said. The Dementors shouldn't approach the train again. If they do, Harry said, we'll manage. Lupin looked at him, the complicated look again, with something added now, observation, calibration, the look of a teacher in the first moments of understanding what kind of student they're dealing with. Yes, he said quietly. I rather think you will. Lupin's classes were everything Lockhart's hadn't been and everything Quirrell's could have been if Quirrell had been himself. He taught with the same quiet genuineness he showed on the train, not performative, not theatrical, deeply knowledgeable, patient in a way that distinguished between students who needed more time and students who were simply not paying attention, and never treating the two the same. The Boggart lesson in particular was the kind of teaching that Harry found himself filing under things to remember about how this is supposed to work. He let the students lead. He laughed when it was funny. He praised sparingly but specifically. He created a room that felt safe enough for Neville to put a tiara on Snape's Boggart form and laugh at it, which was something Harry suspected Neville needed more than he'd been getting. Harry's Boggart was dealt with before Lupin set it free, a brief private word before class. It might show you Voldemort, he said, or a Dementor. The class doesn't need that. The class would survive it, Harry said. Maybe. But it might not be the most useful thing for you, Lupin said carefully. If you'd like to face it privately, I'm available after class. Harry looked at him. What do you think it will show me? Lupin paused. I don't know, you're more difficult to read than I expected. In a good way, he added, and he sounded like he meant it. What do you think it will show you? Harry thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said, which was the true answer. That's interesting, actually. Most fears have a shape. Yours might be shapeless, Lupin said. Some of the worst ones are. He paused. Dumbledore's Boggart is a mirror. Harry absorbed that. He's afraid of himself, he said slowly. He's afraid of what he would do with unchecked power, Lupin said. I've always thought it was the most honest fear I'd ever heard of. Harry thought about Dumbledore drinking tea in the cottage, teaching Harry chess and patience and the difference between the things worth doing and the things that only felt worth doing. The man who could level mountains and chose to set alarms for Harry's school terms. He's worked very hard not to be afraid of the wrong things, he said. He has, Lupin agreed, and there was something in his voice that was fond and sad and long. Harry faced his Boggart after class privately with Lupin in the room. It emerged from the wardrobe in the empty classroom and resolved into a figure, not Voldemort, not a Dementor. It was a version of Hogwarts empty of everyone. The castle, the corridors, the common room utterly vacant, no one left, everyone gone. Harry alone in the full expanse of the only place he'd ever felt entirely himself. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said, ridiculous, and the empty Hogwarts filled with noise and light, and the Boggart spun and vanished. Lupin said nothing for a moment. Then loneliness. Not exactly, Harry said. Lost the specific kind where you build something and it's taken. He looked at the wardrobe. It's not the worst fear I've heard of. No, Lupin said. He sounded moved in the way of someone trying to contain it. It's very human. Harry looked at him. You knew my father well. Better than almost anyone, Lupin said. The pain in it was old and precise, the kind that's been carried long enough to be familiar. Tell me about him sometime, Harry said. The real version, not the hero version. People are always very keen on the hero version. Lupin looked at him with something that was close to undone. He was remarkable, he said, and also occasionally infuriating and funny in a way that didn't always know when to stop, and intensely loyal, and he stopped. Yes, I'd like that sometime. Good, Harry said. He picked up his bag. The Patronus lesson. I'd like you to teach Hermione directly if you're willing. She's adapted the theory in a way that I think you'd find useful to understand before you teach the standard version to the class. Lupin blinked at the transition, then at the request, which was collegial in a way that wasn't quite what he expected from a 13-year-old. Of course, he said. Send her my way. October settled into November and the Quidditch season began, and Harry flew with the pure, uncomplicated joy he felt nowhere else. The broom and the sky and the speed, the game that lived in the body rather than the mind, and he played Seeker with the particular quality of someone who has internalized both the technical and instinctive dimensions of a thing until there's nothing separating them. Gryffindor's first match was against Hufflepuff, and halfway through the third quarter the sky opened into a downpour that turned the pitch into a grey wall of rain, and Harry was 50 feet up in it when he felt the cold come in. 3 Dementors at the edge of the pitch. Real ones, not Boggart versions. The Ministry's guard drifted too close to the game. Harry felt the cold and the pull of the grief edge, that distant screaming that lived below his conscious memory, and he felt himself beginning to list on the broom. He yanked his focus back not by resistance but by the same method Dumbledore had taught him for pain management, for pressure, for the things that tried to knock you sideways, present, deliberate, here, not there, here. He pulled up, scanned the pitch, saw the snitch 20 feet below him to the left, and Dove. He caught it with his right hand while the Dementor's influence was actively pressing on him, the cold thick enough to see in his breath, and he landed on the pitch with the snitch and stood up, and the crowd made the sound crowds make. He was already looking at the Dementors at the pitch boundary with the even, clear-eyed focus of someone who has just decided something. He raised his wand, and the patronus that came out of it, the one he'd been practicing since September with Lupin's help and his own persistent work, was a stag, silver-white and full, enormous against the rain, and it moved toward the Dementors with the calm, absolute authority of something that has never been afraid of them and never will be. The Dementors retreated. The crowd, which had been watching in the thick silence of a stadium full of people seeing something they'd never seen before, made a different sound entirely. Harry walked off the pitch in the rain and found Hermione waiting at the entrance to the changing rooms. She looked at his face and at the snitch in his hand and at the three Dementors retreating in the distance and said, "Are you all right?" "Fine," he said. "Your patronus is a stag," she said. "Yes, like your father's animagus form." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't think that's a coincidence." "Neither do I," he said. "I think it means—" He stopped because he wasn't entirely sure what it meant, only that it meant something, only that the stag had come out of him without premeditation, and that felt like the most honest version of what patronus magic was supposed to do. "I think it means he's still in there somewhere, in what made me." Hermione looked at him with the particular look she reserved for moments when she was feeling something she didn't have a word for. "Yes," she said quietly, "I think so." He was cold and soaked, and the Dementor chill was fading slowly from the inside out. She reached into her bag and produced a large piece of chocolate with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who has taken Lupin's lesson on Dementor countermeasures very seriously. "Eat that," she said, "and come inside." He ate it. He went inside, and later in the common room after dinner when he wrote to Dumbledore about the patronus and the stag, Dumbledore wrote back a single line, "Of course it is, what else would it ever be?" December brought Lupin's revelation, not the werewolf that came later in the way that the most significant revelations always arrive, not when you've prepared for them but when the circumstances demand it. December brought something quieter, Lupin staying after class to mark papers on a Friday afternoon and Harry coming back for a book he'd left and finding the professor sitting very still at his desk looking at something in his hands. Harry looked at what it was, a photograph, old, worn at the edges, 4 boys laughing in what was recognizably Hogwarts grounds, early summer, the lake behind them. He recognized his father's face from Dumbledore's photographs, the same careless energy, the same laugh that was too loud and didn't care. He recognized Sirius Black from the wanted posters, younger and easy in a way the posters didn't capture. The thin, kind face next to them was Lupin himself, 20 years younger and lighter, and the smaller one at the edge, grinning at something out of frame, Peter Pettigrew, alive, hands visible, both of them, 10 fingers. Harry picked up his book and said very quietly, "I know he's alive." Lupin went still. "I've known since August," Harry said. "Pettigrew, he faked his death. He's been hiding as an animagus, a rat with a family who didn't know what they had." He set his book in his bag. "I've been working on how to expose him." Lupin stared at him. He was very pale. He started. "How did you?" "The evidence was there," Harry said. "No trial for Black, no wand examination. A man with a known capacity for theatrical self-sacrifice cutting off his own finger to fake a death. 12 Muggle deaths from a wand that produced no secondary evidence of the scale of destruction a proper explosion would require." He looked at Lupin steadily. "And you've never believed Black was guilty, have you?" It wasn't a question. Lupin closed his eyes briefly. "No," he said, "I haven't, but you said nothing." "I had no proof," he said, "and no one was interested in my doubts. I don't carry a great deal of institutional authority." He said it without self-pity. Just fact, the particular weight of someone accustomed to being managed around rather than consulted. "I'm not interested in institutional authority," Harry said. "I'm interested in getting Sirius Black out of Azkaban and Peter Pettigrew into it." He sat down across from Lupin. "Tell me what you know." "Everything. I'll tell you what I know and we'll build the case." Lupin stared at him for a long, complicated moment. There was grief in it and relief and the particular look of someone who has been carrying a thing alone for a very long time and has just been offered help in a form they weren't expecting. "You're very like him," Lupin said, meaning James. "Dumbledore says I'm my own thing," Harry said, "but I'll take the parts of him worth taking." Lupin almost smiled and it changed his face completely. "All right," he said and spread the photograph on the desk between them. "Let me tell you about Peter Pettigrew. They exposed him in February. Not dramatically, not because Harry didn't have the capacity for drama, but because drama was inefficient and the goal was exoneration, not performance. The exposure was precise, surgical, and went exactly as planned in all the ways that mattered and slightly sideways in one way they hadn't fully planned for. The plan was simple in structure, complicated in execution. Ron's rat scabbers had been behaving with increasing agitation since the school year began, which Harry had noted in September and attributed to the presence of Crookshanks, Hermione's half-Kneasel, who had excellent instincts about what was and wasn't actually an animal. Hermione had figured that part out by October and had been letting Crookshanks apply steady pressure since November. By February, Scabbers was cornered. They did it in an empty classroom after dinner. The five of them, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and Lupin, who had agreed to be present as official witness and to provide the force of staff authority that would make any exposure legally legible. Ron's rat was in a conjured cage. Hermione had prepared an animagus revealing spell that Lupin had helped her refine, adapted from the registry detection charm used by the Ministry, but made more reliable by the addition of her spell compression work. Ron, to his credit, had taken the full explanation from Harry with the open, honest processing of someone who didn't want it to be true but who was capable of following evidence where it led. If it's true, he'd said, then he's been in our house for 12 years. Yes, Harry said, my mum let him sleep in the garden in summer. He used to sit on Percy's head. Ron, I'm not defending him, Ron said quickly. I'm just noting that it's disgusting. It's very disgusting, Hermione confirmed. Right, Ron said. Okay, let's catch him. In the classroom, Hermione cast the spell and Scabbers became Peter Pettigrew in a series of stages that were anatomically one of the more alarming things any of them had seen. He was small and damp-looking and grey-haired, as if the rat had simply scaled up, and he blinked in the torchlight with the pale, frantic eyes of an animal that has been caught after a very long run. He looked at Harry and his face went white. Hello, Peter, Harry said. Pettigrew's eyes moved around the room. Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Lupin. He made a calculation, then he ran. He'd made it 4 steps toward the door before he stopped. He stopped because Harry had put a full-force Petrificus Totalis on him from across the room before he'd completed his second stride, clean and immediate and wondrously reinforced so that it locked rather than simply held, and Pettigrew stood in the middle of the classroom frozen in mid-run with his mouth open and his eyes showing the whites. Lupin looked at Harry. I've seen auras with worse reflexes, he said. He was going to run, Harry said. I wasn't interested in a chase. What do we do with him? Ron asked, staring at the frozen Pettigrew with an expression of genuine personal revulsion. We take him to Dumbledore, Harry said. Tonight, now actually. They took him to Dumbledore, and Dumbledore looked at Peter Pettigrew frozen in mid-flight in his office with the expression of a man who has been wrong about something important for 12 years and is choosing to feel the weight of it fully rather than deflecting. Peter, he said softly. He released the petrification. Pettigrew collapsed into the chair Dumbledore transfigured for him and started crying, and it was terrible in the particular way of someone crying not from remorse, but from the discovery that there is nothing left to hide behind. He talked. Dumbledore let him talk, and Harry listened with the focused, recording attention he'd inherited from years of Dumbledore's lessons, and what came out was the whole of it, the approach from Voldemort, the fear, the choice, the betrayal, the fake death. 12 years as a rat because he couldn't go to Voldemort without a body to serve and couldn't go back to the wizarding world without facing what he'd done. It was not a sympathetic account, even from Pettigrew's own mouth. It was small and frightened, and it never once named James and Lily as anything other than a consequence. Harry felt angry. He let himself feel it, the clean, direct anger of someone who has just heard the mechanism of his parents' deaths explained by the man responsible, who is crying about his own situation. He held the anger and did not act on it and did not pretend it wasn't there. What happens to him now? Ron asked Dumbledore. The Ministry, Dumbledore said. A proper trial this time, with the correct procedures. He looked at Pettigrew, who had shrunk into the chair. And I will be calling in certain favors to ensure that the Wisengamot is fully informed of what was and was not done in 1981. Sirius Black, Harry said, will be exonerated, Dumbledore said with a quiet certainty that had the weight of a man who has decided something and has enough history to see it through. Within the week, if I have anything to say about it. And he does, Harry told Ron, who nodded, slightly dazed by the speed of all of it. Sirius Black was released from Ministry custody 14 days after Pettigrew's arrest, with a formal exoneration that the Daily Prophet ran on the front page and that the Ministry framed as a correction of administrative error, with the serene self-justification of institutions that cannot fully admit fault. Dumbledore brought Sirius to Larkspur on a Tuesday afternoon in February, which Harry knew was happening because Dumbledore had told him in advance, and Harry was in the kitchen making tea when they arrived. He heard the apparition in the garden and stayed where he was because the kitchen was warm and Sirius Black had just spent 12 years in Azkaban and did not need to be met at the door like a guest being received formally. Dumbledore came in first, said, "He's here," and stood aside. Sirius Black came through the cottage door and stopped. He was thinner than the wanted posters. Prison had taken things from him that the photographs didn't capture, left him with the quality of something that has been compressed for a long time and hasn't quite remembered how to expand. His hair was long and tangled, and his eyes were grey and sharp, and they fixed on Harry with the particular, arrested intensity of someone looking at a face that is and isn't the one they expected. He looked like James, those eyes said. He looked like Lily too. He looked like someone who had been raised carefully in a way that showed in his posture and his stillness, and that was not James at all, and Sirius was recalibrating in real time, running years of expectation up against the actual person. "You're nothing like I imagined," Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse, but it had warmth underneath, like something coming back to life. "I know," Harry said. "Sit down, tea's just ready." Sirius looked at him for another moment, then something in him seemed to release some coiled defensive thing that had been wound tight for 12 years, and he sat at the flagstone kitchen table and accepted the tea Harry put in front of him with hands that were slightly unsteady. "I heard what you did," Sirius said. "Pettigrew, Dumbledore told me." "We found him," Harry said. "He said it was you and a friend." "Hermione," Harry said. "And Ron, whose rat it was, which was unpleasant for him." Sirius made a sound that was almost a laugh, rusty, uncertain, the laugh of someone testing whether they still had one. "You went after a fugitive animagus because you figured out he was alive." "The evidence was there," Harry said. "You're 13. The evidence doesn't have an age requirement." Another rusty sound, fuller this time, more like a laugh actually is. Sirius wrapped his hands around the teacup and looked at the flagstone floor and said, without looking up, "I'm sorry about James and Lily." "I know that don't," Harry said gently. "You didn't do it. You don't need to apologize for something you didn't do." "I should have been there," Sirius said. "You were where you thought you needed to be," Harry said. "Pettigrew made choices. Those are his to carry." Sirius looked up at him with the full weight of 12 years behind it. You're really something," he said, and it sounded helpless in the best possible way. "So I've been told," Harry said. "He more actions request aborted."